Welcome to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast series with U.S. Navy Special Operations veteran, CEO, and hockey fanatic Bob Pizzini. Bob discusses leadership, success, failure, defining moments, and hard lessons learned with guests who are intentional in their approach to leadership. Leadership is a perishable skill. Use it or lose it. In this series, entrepreneurs, industry executives, academics, public figures, and other highly effective professionals share their formulas for success with you.
Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Elevate Your Leadership podcast with me, your host, Bob Pizzini. If you've listened to the show before, which I sure hope you have, you know that I have discussions with people who have been there, done that in positions of leadership, people who have brought value to me and my organization through our discussions and conversations. And these are people who I know by you listening in on our discussion will bring great value to you and your organization. Remember, the Elevate Your Leadership podcast, it's all about leadership. Today's guest, I'm running 2 for 2 here on former governors in the state of Virginia. I have former Governor George Allen. And before we formally give George the mic, I'm going to read his bio briefly. Very interesting bio, a lot of stuff that this gentleman has accomplished in his life. So George F. Allen was the 67th governor of the state of Virginia. He served from 1994 to 1998. He was a U.S. senator, and I was just joking a minute ago how it seems like in Virginia you have to be a former governor to be a U.S. senator, considering our 2 current U.S. senators and Mr. Allen here. He was a U.S. Senator from 2001 to 2007, and he currently is the president of George Allen Strategies, LLC. He was born to George H. Allen, a Hall of Fame football coach, coached the Chicago Bears amongst the many teams. By the way, we're going to have great sports discussions.
Good.
And his mother, Henrietta L. Allen, a Tunisian-born survivor of Nazi occupation of North Africa, and we'd definitely like to hear a little bit about that. George F. Allen holds a Bachelor of Arts degree with distinction in history and a Juris Doctorate law degree from University of Virginia, where he played on UVA's football and rugby teams. How tall are you?
6'3" 3/4.
Okay. Do you remember what you weighed when you played on rugby and football team?
Much less, probably around 200 or less.
All right.
Less than 200 pounds, which I can't say. I'm over that now. I'm not in playing weight, nor do I have an ACL in my right knee.
All right. Well,
which ended up getting. I'd lost the first time in an alumni football game, thinking I played quarterback and thought I could get on the kickoff team because I played outside center in rugby. And I said, oh, these linemen, footballs are bouncing off their heads and all that. And so I ended up getting a cross body block and losing my ACL, getting phlebitis from that in 1979. So then, as governor, we had these college interns in the summer, and we'd play pickup football games. I was doing just fine as playing safety or quarterback. And I thought, I'm going to go in and get a sack for a safety. And I jump up in the air. Some guy's blocking me. Another falls in my knee and takes out my ACL. Reminding me of my father would always say is play your position. You should not try to be getting it. So very limited in the, I can ride a bike, and walk.
You were still a young man at that time.
Yeah, at that time.
Allen was named All-ACC Academic Team quarterback in 1970.
Academic team.
Yeah.
Not athletic, academic. The competition to get All-ACC Academic is you had to have at least a B average.
Okay.
And so I think that knocked out about half the quarterbacks for it.
Okay, all right. During Governor Allen's term as governor from 1994 to 1998, he successfully cut taxes by more than $600 million, instituted his high academic standards of learnings, which prevail today, the SOLs, and we've got a program here I was telling you about with the CTAC kids. Our curriculum and our STEM curriculum is in alignment with Virginia SOLs.
Great. That was one of the things we want to do, and we put in high academic standards in reading, writing, math, science, history, economics, and so forth. And we wanted to align them in such a way, say standard 5.2 or whatever. Museums that's great. I'm so happy to hear that you did that, because the teachers are looking at ways, how can we creatively meet these various standards?
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that I fly is involved in it. I know there's museums that are, like the Mariners Museum and others that are really great museums we have in Virginia. But it's great that you align it. It's a big help for the teachers and obviously great for the students.
For sure, yeah. 3 levels. We have elementary, intermediate, and high school.
Which standards? And I'm interviewing you now. Yeah. But what standards?
So it's the Virginia Department of Education.
I know the standards.
Yeah,
Which one is
it's STEM. Whatever the specifics are for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And
really,
yeah. And I couldn't tell you the next layer down from that. Because we have an academic, my general manager, Jason,
when we're through this, I want to see what that is, because that's really great. One of the things that Governor Youngkin's trying to do is, yes, we have standards, and it's great to have standards, but you also need measurement. And we put in testing in 3rd grade, 5th grade, end of middle school, and end up graduating from high school. Because and we had very high standards. What has happened in really the recent years is they dumbed down the standards. Mm-hmm. They made the cut scores of passing proficiency lower. Mm-hmm. Governor Youngkin is trying to get that back up. And then you had on top of it all excessive closure of public schools in Virginia and some other states, mostly to the north of us. Meanwhile, Tennessee was open and Georgia. And
you mean during the COVID?
COVID, right.
Yeah.
And so that took away 2 years of in-person learning
for
young people, and it's devastating.
Oh, my kids were in high school at the time. We saw it firsthand.
Yeah, but you're there, and you have the technology, and you can reinforce it. I'm most worried about kids from lower-income families that don't have a good home life. I work on a group called Communities in Schools, which helps out. You help out there at SeaTac
for sure,
elementary school, with Achievable Dream.
Exactly.
And so those are great programs, but not everyone has a Communities in Schools or Achievable Dream.
Right.
And I worry about those young people because education is such an important educator or indicator of someone's success in life. A good home life and education, those are 2 ingredients.
Without a doubt. The key to, and that as a country we should be focused on every single day, as a country and as a community.
Right, and you need measurement. You talk about sports, you don't watch a basketball game and wonder what the score is.
Sure.
The scoreboard.
Yeah.
And so if a young a student is not learning or reading at the right level or knowing mathematics at the right level, you don't just socially promote them from grade to grade. You give them added help, tutoring, maybe summer school, but you don't just pass them on. So you need to have that accountability. And we put in school performance report cards so parents and taxpayers could see, all right, which schools are doing well.
Yeah.
Or not.
And give parents more choice in that regard. So.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, lot to discuss there. Back to tail end of your bio real quick. So while George Allen was the governor, he also enacted the nation's first public-private transportation funding system, repealed or amended 71% of all regulations. That's a big priority for our current president. Reduced the size of government with greater efficiency and accountability, grew the economy, making sure the world knew that Virginia is open for business. And as a business owner in the state of Virginia, and as the current chairman of the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, and as somebody who has done exchanges, community business development exchanges in Europe, I know that through Virginia Economic Development, we have a robust program. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
As a...
the measurement we had for that, we were talking about education and welfare reform and crime and all these different things we did. In economic development, I spent more time on that than anything else. You got to be like a hungry hunter, trying to get more business and investment and growing existing businesses. And the way you measure economic development success is how much investment and how many net new jobs are created in the private sector. Because we reduced the state government workforce by 10%, but there were over 312,000 net new jobs created during that 4-year period. And Virginia was open for business. We got dubbed the Silicon Dominion because they were getting semiconductor fabs in, and everyone's now talking about semiconductors. I said, yeah, we were talking about that in the 1990s.
Yeah,
getting semiconductor fabs. Now there's the big concern for.
It's funny because when I was preparing for this discussion, that that dawned on me. It's like, wow, you were focused on this way back then.
Yeah.
And it's really front and center now, all the way up to like the AI stuff. So as a U.S. Senator, Senator Allen was a member of the following committees: Energy and Natural Resources, Commerce, Science and Transportation, Foreign Relations, kind of where my heart is, being a 26-year Navy veteran. He was chairman of the European Affairs Committee. I actually lived in Europe for 3 years. Small business and entrepreneurship. He also served in the Senate Republican leadership as chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee for the 2004 election cycle. That must have been because you were the new senator and they gave you that. The new guy gets that.
We had to
job.
compete for it, but I figured we need reinforcements.
Okay.
I wanted to recruit good folks.
Okay.
We were able to do it. And that is a position of leadership. And we got up to 55 senators.
Wow.
After that. And there were a lot of them that are great wins, historic wins. First Hispanic Republican Senator Mel Martinez in Florida, first Republican that won in Louisiana. But my favorite was John Thune, getting John Thune to run in South Dakota against Tom Daschle, the Senate leader, obstructionist is what I called him, and getting John Thune to run. The key to winning elections, in my view, nothing more important than the quality of the candidate.
Yeah,
that resonates with the people in their state. Somebody who's going to resonate in Tennessee may not resonate in Massachusetts, or somebody who will do well in a place like Arizona might not do so great in Nebraska. But getting him in just was to run.
Sure.
It's really important. A lot of flying to South Dakota and
all right,
convincing him and so forth.
And he's leading the Senate
he's
today.
He's a leader. He's now the leader in the Senate. He's a good quality person.
Wow. Okay, your recruit. He was your recruit.
Yeah, he was my recruit. Star recruit.
There's a claim to fame right there. That's pretty awesome. Okay, and then in 2007, after then Senator Allen left the Senate, he founded
involuntarily lost the election. But go ahead.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that. Yeah. Senator Allen founded George Allen Strategies, which provides companies and individuals with insightful, effective counsel, consulting, and strategic advice on a range of issues, including energy, technology, and business development. In 2010, he authored his book, What Washington Can Learn from the World of Sports. We've been talking sports since you came in the building. You're a football guy. I'm a hockey guy, but I think you know more about hockey than I do.
I don't think so.
But it's still fascinating, and I could not agree more, especially as we raise our kids and all these things that sports has to do with developing incredible people. I would say most importantly is this next and final paragraph here. He and his wife, Susan, happily reside in Virginia Beach and have 3 adult children. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Governor Allen's wife, Susan, and she's just a pleasant, fun woman, and it's just so fun to be around. And like with most of my guests, actually all of my guests, I've interacted with my guests before, which is why I invited them to the show, because I thought, wow, what a great discussion. And I have to say I had the privilege of sitting next to Governor Allen and his wife, Susan, at the Virginia Beach State of the City recently. And what just in the little bits we could talk to each other, because there's a lot of other stuff going on, just fascinating discussions.
The fun thing with Susan is in campaigns, and campaigns are a team sport, team effort. The women's clubs in Southwest Virginia put this when I was running for governor, and they had a picture of Susan and me on their button, and it said, "Vote for Susan Allen's husband for governor."
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. So that's, and again, the discussions that you and I have had, we talked about the Chicago area. Your dad was a football coach for the Bears at some point. And I like to start all of my discussions kind of in that upbringing. But before we do that, this is like breaking news. We have current politics and news flash. So before we learn how George Allen became George Allen, which, our seeds are cultivated in our childhood, what do you make of this Signalgate and, the current political dynamic given what we see on TV today?
What you see on TV is generally divisive, and each side has their own set of facts and biased reporting. It's one of the reasons I think newspapers are dying, is people can get biased information for free on the internet. not because of the internet. You really, Ronald Reagan's saying was trust but verify. I think you just got to verify the veracity of anything you read with all the clickbait and the texts and the emails and all you get. Specifically on Signalgate, that was a mistake. And I like the way that Waltz, the director of national security, handled it. He said, I made a mistake. I added, somehow inadvertently put this reporter on that. I don't know if you do, but every once in a while I'll get an email from someone saying, I don't know what this is about.
For sure.
And they just made a mistake. It may have been a George Albritton or something, and they just clicked the wrong name and something like that. So the reporter shouldn't have been brought in. And I think that the way that Director Waltz handled it, he said, I made a mistake. We're going to find out how that happened. I'm not going to blame it on staff. That's the way to handle it. And I do think Secretary Hegseth is the one who did do something wrong. And whether you want to call it classified or crucial information about what they're fixing to do, there's the plans of here's where we're going to hit and here's the timing, that should not have been sent out. Now, that's a mistake. They can learn from that mistake. I don't think anybody will get fired over it. But just the way this is all being reported in the media is so exemplary of the way politics have gotten these days. And to me, I call it situational principles. And the media showing Hegseth ripping the heck out of Hillary Clinton. And I don't think they're exactly the same situation with their bleached bit and
the hammer on the BlackBerry.
And all that kind of stuff is slightly different, but there was, I always say when something happens, stick to your principles, be guided by it. Don't just be a bobblehead for your own team.
Mm-hmm.
Think for yourself, stick to your principles. What happened was a mistake. It was wrong. Fortunately, there was no harm done from it. The military action seemed to be
on point, executed on point.
Executed well, no loss of life, no injury, no damage to any equipment or anything else other than to the targets. But you learn from it. But what's happening in our country, and you even see it in our Commonwealth, is that both parties are getting pulled to extremes. And there needs to be times where people can find a way to work together. The fact that they're a whole year continuing resolution, to me, is such an abdication of responsibility. When I was in the Senate, I put forward a proposal, which they refused to vote on, which said if you don't get appropriations bills done on time, you withhold the pay of the members of Congress.
Absolutely.
It's the one thing that Congress has to do. It's a full-time legislature. It's not like the Virginia General Assembly that's a part-time citizen legislature. And every year they would have a continuing resolution till around Thanksgiving. Then you get another one till around Christmas, and some mammoth, they call them omnibus bill.
Right.
It's passed.
Everything.
And I said it's such an irresponsible approach. Now they've done it for an entire year. Now the Republicans are saying, "Isn't this great? We pulled it off." The Democrats are screaming. And they wanted to shut down the government. And shutting down the government is so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
To shut down the government, it doesn't save any money. It's a waste of the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, all those employees get paid for doing nothing.
That's right. That's right.
So they need to have a balanced budget requirement and
exactly
chain them down with the Constitution. And I really do think if you withheld members' pay until they got it done, they would get these appropriations bills done.
They'd get it done early or on time.
I remember I was giving a railing on the Senate floor one day on my, I call it taxpayer protection bill or paycheck penalty bill. And one of the wives of my fellow senators was at this reception that night, and she said, "Oh, I saw you giving that speech on the floor on your paycheck penalty." And I said, "Oh, do you like it?" She says, "No, not really, because you realize our health insurance is taken out of our paycheck automatically. Now, if we don't get a paycheck, what's going to happen to our health insurance payments, monthly payments?" And I said, she said, "Oh, you hadn't thought of that, have you?" I said, Well, I reckon you just have to write a check. And when she said, I mean, I don't want to have to remember about writing a check every month for our insurance. When I drove home that night, I said, this is really a great idea because the spouses will be after him. Hey, get this done.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to remember in November and December to be writing a check.
That's right.
To pay for
Get it done.
So you get
it done.
The home gives them pressure as well as constituents.
For sure. Well, I remember being a young sailor stationed in Italy. I was in Italy for 3 years, and somebody came in and said, we might not get paid this Friday because the NDAA, number one, the NDAA wasn't passed, and then it's a CR. So I remember being a young sailor stationed in Italy, and one of our leaders came in and said, we might not get paid this week because the NDAA wasn't passed and the CRA, the Continuing Resolution Authority, wasn't passed. And even, I guess maybe, this is probably during your time frame. Well, 93 to 96 is when I was
governor in those days.
Yeah, okay. But I guess a bill could be passed, but military pay maybe not. I'm not sure. But as a junior sailor, you don't know the ins and outs of that. You know that you got rent to
here
pay.
You are. You have rent to pay back home, this, that, and the other. Plus, you're serving the military. In those days, that's when all the Serbia,
for sure, Croatia served the whole thing,
and all that was going on.
Yep.
So, I know Virginia Guard members. I actually visited them as governor in Bosnia, and so here you are risking your life, and you're wondering about are you going to get paid? That's just deplorably inefficient, stupid, deplorable, disgusting abdication of responsibility.
And you felt so strongly about it, you tried to pass a rule or a law within the Senate that says senators don't get paid unless we figure this out.
Yeah.
Will that ever go anywhere?
Well, they didn't even want to vote on it.
Yeah.
Because, if you put that to vote in the real world outside of Washington, and I remember saying up there, I never want to get accustomed to thinking the way y'all do. And I got in trouble for also saying it moves at the pace of a wounded sea slug compared to governor, where you make more decisions in one morning than you do all week in the Senate.
Yeah.
And they worship process, and they don't get things done. But I wanted to have it for a vote. If you had an addition being put on to your iFly facility here, you might pay the contractor a portion of it, but the final payment's not done until that contractor finishes the job.
That's right.
That's the way it is in the real world, and that's their sole job to do. And if they don't do it on time, they shouldn't get paid, or you withhold their pay until they get it done. And you got to have those type of motivations, incentives, and penalties for failure to do your job.
Yeah, boy.
And it makes sense. That's why they didn't want to vote on it, because they knew in an election their opponents said, hey, normal people, again, in the real world, that's the way it operates.
Accountability. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. And so that would increase accountability, and within the Senate, nobody wanted to do that.
Well, they didn't even want to vote on it.
Yeah. Wow. Let's, and so before we embark on your childhood, one other thing, current events this morning, Governor Youngkin participated in a press conference with the Attorney General, Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, regarding this MS-13 member, apparently number 3 in the organization, who was arrested in the state of Virginia, I believe within 30 minutes of Washington, D.C. proper.
As I understand, it was Manassas or Prince William County. And I got to actually research this because tomorrow morning on WRVA, we're going to talk about this subject. Cool. And so honestly, before I came here, I said, let me get the facts of this.
Great.
Because I want to, number one, it's great that they arrested this MS-13 gang leader. That's great. Mm-hmm. What I want to find out is which jurisdiction, whether it was the city of Manassas or Prince William County, and whether local law enforcement cooperated with ICE in it. Because the city of Richmond, and I want to find out if they're still a sanctuary city, and they were the mayor of Richmond, Avula, I think his name is, said that they, their law enforcement didn't want to get involved in any of this illegal immigration enforcement.
Yeah.
And so
recently.
Oh yeah, recently.
Yeah.
So I want to see if they still have that. I don't know. So I never want to say, but if I could look on my phone now, but I'm not going to do
this
because I really do want to research, and because that will be First of all, it's number one, it's great that they caught this guy. Great leadership from President Trump, Tom Homan, the whole ICE crew. I wanted to find out, and hopefully the law enforcement there in Prince William or the city of Manassas cooperated. Local law enforcement is very important. Most crimes are state crimes, and they are local police, local sheriffs, and so forth involved, and they ought to cooperate. It may not be their primary function, but if they catch someone who's an illegal immigrant,
why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? For the protection, the safety of your neighborhoods,
For
of your
sure.
communities, your businesses, your people. And so some of these, we have these sanctuary city mindsets in the city of Richmond. We did have that there. Same with Fairfax County. It's not just San Francisco. It's not just California. It's not just New York City and Chicago and places like that. Those type cities, we have some of those problems here. And I know Governor Youngkin was saying he didn't want to fund any of these counties or cities in Virginia, which are mostly the city of Richmond and Northern Virginia localities that, for whatever reason, think illegal immigration is not a problem. But that MS-13 gang, that's very serious. So it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
And let's see what we can learn from it. And then sometimes you have to embarrass people into doing the right thing.
For sure.
So with that, I want to find out if Richmond's still a sanctuary city. I want to say, the folks in Prince William or Manassas helped out there. In Richmond, the mayor of Richmond and the police in Richmond say they wouldn't want to help.
Yeah.
Don't you think the people of Richmond want to let their mayor know
For sure.
that we expect you to cooperate?
Yeah, with the federal authorities.
Right.
But the press conference was full of information based on what.
I missed a press conference. Maybe if I watched a press conference, I'd have answers.
Oh yeah, no, it was great because at that press conference this morning, and one of the reasons Governor Youngkin participated in it was because of the brand new level of cooperation between federal, state, and maybe local. I'm not sure.
I have no question the state police.
Yeah.
There's nowhere near as many state troopers as there are local police officers.
Right.
Or sheriff's deputies if you have sheriff's chief law enforcement. I would have wanted to see at that press conference, and maybe you can answer this. Again, I'm asking you, were there any local police officers there, if you can recollect?
Yeah. So I remember all the discussion of federal and state. I don't remember discussion of local. So I don't know is my answer. So I can't.
But most of the information, local law enforcement knows what's going on better than any law enforcement about what's going on here in Virginia Beach or Chesapeake or Botetourt County or Buchanan County. They know who the troublemakers are, or
for sure. They're more of they know the ground truth. They're the eyes and the ears. They know the ground truth. So atmospherics, military and all the special operations I did. That's who you go to. You go to
principal.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so anyway, those were the couple breaking stories this morning, and the fact that Virginia was so key to that MS-13 capture was pretty cool. So, okay, let's go back to.
There's a whole lot more of them they need to get after. If people should just exhale and say, "Oh, we don't have to worry anymore."
Oh no, we're just getting started.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think with the way President Trump is directing his Department of Justice and all the other resources, we are just getting started. Yeah. So okay,
I think that by the way, for the most stark difference in the two administrations is securing and controlling our borders and illegal immigration. Obviously, there's a big difference in energy policy that President Trump realizes we're blessed with the most energy resources in the world, and we're not going to run our economy on intermittent, costly, offshore wind boondoggles and solar. And solar can be, supplemental, but he realizes, American natural gas, coal, oil. We don't need to be worrying about what's going on with hostile countries around the world. And so his energy policies are a big difference. Tax policies, regulatory policies. All of those are different, but the starkest one that everyone sees the difference is at our border in enforcement of immigration laws.
Huge. Yeah, absolutely huge. And all that touches economy, that touches really every other part of Americana. And
Yeah, well, so all of them do. I mean, the border, you got
Yeah.
to secure, a sovereign country needs to be able to defend, feed, and fuel itself.
yeah.
And so, a country needs to, what country doesn't, it lets anybody in?
The U.S. is
Yeah.
the only one.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Italy for 3 years, although the U.K., I was just with some British folks not too long ago, and they said that their country is being overrun. Sweden, I guess, is being, these...
Well, they've let all these refugees in there,
Yeah.
and it's causing trouble.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And there's a political upheaval in a lot of those European countries.
And they'll go through the cycle kind of like we are right now. We're... the pendulum swings, as they say. So, but it's swung in the right direction here for America. And again, I'm a business owner. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a parent. I'm a very active member of the community. And some things are so obvious that we have to be doing to, number one, protect, number two, provide, all these things that are key to...
Well, and let's say this, too, is that we're for legal immigration. This
100%.
country was built
Yeah.
by immigrants coming in.
My grandfather,
my mother,
yeah.
with it. And so we want legal immigration. I've always said we want to be the world capital of innovation. So you want to attract the best minds, the best talent
Yeah.
in the world
Yeah.
to it. We also need guest workers, seasonal workers, whether in tourism, whether it's in agriculture, and in some other areas. But those are legal ways that you have these.
We have them right here at the oceanfront and the J-1 visa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And all of that's very important to our economy. But these are folks that are vetted. It's not somebody who just crossed the Rio Grande.
Yeah, exactly.
And came in.
And this MS-13 guy is illegal, entered illegally, was in this country illegally,
Well,
crossed the Rio Grande or the border at some point, So, okay, man, oh man, where did you grow up?
Well, my parents were married in Sioux City, Iowa, and during the gestation, my father was coaching at Morningside College in Sioux City, and my mother came over after World War II from Tunisia on the Mediterranean to visit some friends, and meets my father. They somehow fall in love. My father would have napkins at the table, and he'd be drawing X's and O's and arrows. And he was designing plays. My mother thought these are somehow love notes with it. And so they got married during the gestation period. My father got a job at Whittier College. And so I was dropped in Whittier. He's coaching the Whittier Poets.
Okay.
Least fierce name you can imagine for a football team. So I was born in Whittier, California. And so he coached there. 1 year with the Rams, got fired as an assistant coach. He was out of work when I was in first grade. He sold golf clubs and worked at a car wash and so forth. Then he got hired on by Papa Bear George Hallis.
Okay, George S. Hallis.
Yeah, founder of the NFL.
Uh-huh.
And we drove from California on Route 66 in a 1951 Ford Victoria.
Wow.
3 boys to Chicago. We ended up being in Deerfield. It's in Lake County.
Yeah, Deerfield Bubble. I played hockey there.
Did you?
Yeah.
All right. Well, the only hockey I played there was a farmer's pond that we would play on in this farmer's pond. It was not organized hockey like yours. And we lived there from 2nd to 8th, for me, 2nd to 8th grade. Hallis had him also as a scout for the Bears, player personnel. So Christmas time and in the spring, especially Christmas time, we'd be on the road in our Ford Country Squire station wagon to go to bowl games, and he'd visit with coaches.
Okay.
This is the 60s, and this is before the merger of the AFL and NFL.
Uh-huh.
So the Bears could draft someone, and the Kansas City Chiefs would draft that same person. You want to sign them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd go to the Orange Bowl. We had a lot of friends in New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl. We knew where all the best fireworks you could get was Nickajack's Landing near Chattanooga. Their parents would use that as incentives for us. Now, if you behave yourself, shut up, stop acting up, we'll stop for fireworks at Big Daddy's.
Wow.
Nickajack's Landing and so forth. So, and he'd take us to historic sites and Indian mounds and all that on these trips. And he'd take me to training camp as a kid with the Bears, which was at St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana.
Okay.
And you see the players, and I mean, there's all sorts of things that the influences of that. The first chewing tobacco I ever had was from a guy named Doug Atkins. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And he asked me to go get his chewing tobacco out of his scat, his international scat. They don't make those anymore.
Okay.
It's a 4-wheel drive. And so as a kid, you're chewing gum and you like chewing it. So they gave me some beech nut, and at first it was sweet. And they said, oh, you don't need to spit, And then it started burning, and I came as close. I was 8 years old, and I came as close to throwing up. Fortunately, got to a drinking fountain, pushed my mouth out and all that. So I didn't try it again, for 5 years. At least then I knew what to do with it. And Papa Bear Hallis would have the players running around in a circle, and he's just cussing away at them. And he saw me and another young kid, and he says, hey, you boys, get a football and go play in that other field, because he didn't think we should be hearing these kind of things. And my father, one of the beyond Doug Atkins, and he was the defensive coordinator. So all the defense guys, Joe Fortunato and Benny McRae, Rosie Taylor, just great, Richie Pettibone, which my father had on 3 of his teams. All those guys you'd pay attention to. But there was one, I ended up being a quarterback, was Bill Wade. And one of the things my father tried to incent us kids with is so long as you don't smoke, drink, or cuss, at age 21, you'll get $2,000 or a car.
Wow.
That's what cars cost those days.
Yeah.
And so but Bill Wade was always an example. He was a quarterback of the Bears.
Okay.
He went to Vanderbilt. And he taught me all these passing drills, right thumb into your left pocket. You can't do it here without knocking the microphone. But he never would cuss. He'd say, Dad gummit or gosh darn it, and all that kind of stuff. And he said, Bill Wade never cusses, never curses, and so forth. And chewing tobacco was not smoking, so we got around that with it and didn't get caught on the drinking part. But Brother Bruce did. But those training camp days were very influential. And I was just talking to someone, I said, it's when I first started liking stock car racing. There wasn't much to do. There's just cornfields all over the place. There's a Catholic school, and you learn how to say good morning, sister, and good morning, father, all that kind of stuff. But there was a quarry you could swim in, but there was also a dirt track. These little short dirt track. And I remember that if any driver turned his car all the way over, he got $5.
Wow.
And so that's when I started liking stock car racing.
Wow.
Was there. And it's a lot of memories of those players. And the other thing with it is when they'd have to cut players, because you'd be there at training camp. Everyone is working so hard to make the team, and you'd get to like these guys. At least everyone likes them. And I said, oh, gosh, the worst thing of all is how do you cut these players to tell them you can't make the team? And it's always, you felt that everyone's working hard, but not everyone can make it. And I would think that would be the most difficult part of being a coach, is telling someone you're cut, you're not going to make the team.
Herb Brooks, the 1980 Olympic team, he had to send, I forget the guy's name, but he had to send the one player home, that last player. So, Ralph, he had to send Ralph home. I can't remember his name, but that one guy left, and he had to call Ralphie in and say, sorry, Ralphie, you're not going.
Yeah, well, that's, I think, the hardest. I didn't know that. Again, your details of that phenomenal, greatest upset in history.
Yeah.
Because that was a professional Russian army team versus a bunch of rank amateurs.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like having a high school team beat Alabama.
Yeah, exactly. So did you graduate high school in the Chicago area?
No. Then we were in New Orleans, New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1965. And my father's scouting the Sugar Bowl for players. And so we're in New Orleans, and he gets a call from Dan Reeves, who's was the owner of the Rams, to become head coach of the Rams. And which was just great. We were all celebrating, having a great time. New Orleans is a great place. They have a high threshold of fun anyway. But it was just a great celebration, because that's the goal of any assistant coach, is to become a head coach. No one says, gosh, I want to be an assistant coach the rest of my life.
For sure.
And so that was just a tremendous opportunity. Hallis actually sued him for it and saying it's a breach of contract. And we had to go through all sorts of, he had to go through it in our family, a lawsuit over all of that. But Hallis let him go after winning the lawsuit. It's just understood. If any assistant coach has a chance, if you have an employee who has a chance to start their own business or do something else, you can say, hey, you're going to hate losing a key player, but you understand just for their own personal advancement.
Oh, you prop them up and you help them. That's leadership.
Hallis takes them to court. We had to, and they had a process server outside of our house, and they said, don't take the process, keep all the lights off. You see him out in his car on the road smoking a cigarette, but you had to just stay in there. Don't let him know you're here, not to accept process. Anyway, he goes to the Rams. So we move out to California in 1966. The influence of all of that, moving to California was fun. My best friends, though, in California were others who had moved there.
Okay.
And they were from Oklahoma and Texas, like the Texas Longhorns because of my friends and so forth. But the most influential aspect, I mean, there's a lot of influential aspects, obviously, in going to the Rams training camp and doing all that. Our high school football team ran the Rams offense, the same terminology as the Rams offense. The only thing we had different was the Dallas double screen.
Okay.
But it was the same offense. But one of the things about life is you wish you knew then what you know now. I mean, that's such a truism.
For sure.
But one of the most influential aspects in my life was that Ronald Reagan was running for governor of California in 1966. And he came to a Rams practice during the campaign. And so he's there with my father, shoulder to shoulder, asking about the drills they're running, what's this, but interested in. And I said, most politicians, all they care about is 50-yard line seats.
Yeah, right.
They're not going to be at a stinking jury practice and actually engaged and interested in it. And so I said, gee, here's a politician who knows what's important. Football. Because I grew up in a football family. And so Reagan got elected in 66. And so I liked him. They came to Rams practice. He looked like my father. They could be cousins.
Wow.
So the profiles of them, their hair, their features and all. And so we're in high school there, and then end up to Virginia when my father came to the Redskins.
Okay.
And then I end up at the University of Virginia, and I had studied, as you say, history, went to law school, but I also buckarooed on ranches out west in Nevada and Idaho.
Okay.
Because I thought I might want to get into ranching.
Okay.
I was interested in either architectural law or ranching.
Okay.
Architecture, which I love, had too much math to it for me.
Uh-huh.
And so they didn't have pre-law there, so they say take history. And but I worked on these ranches out west, primarily one near Winnemucca, and we had 3,800 head of cattle.
Wow.
High desert, BLM land, hundreds of thousands of acres.
So is this like a high school job, or had you?
No, this was in between after undergraduate school.
Okay.
I couldn't do it then because you had summer football.
Okay.
With it, so it was most law students after their first year in law school work in a law firm.
Oh yeah.
I went out to the Great Western Range.
That's cool.
And yeah, it was cool. It was hard work. It's really hard work. I thought, man, I was just almost passed out the first day. We beat these cattle up into the hills where there's a pond apparently up there. So we move them all the way up there. The cow boss would not have a canteen. He says, you can go all day without drinking water. And so
it's a little different today.
I was parched.
Yeah.
And we're way up there. And I said, I got to get some water. He says, the cattle are all in that pond. It's all muddy. And I was literally passing out. I was thinking I was going to faint.
Yeah.
And we're up on the hill. There's mountain ridges on each side of the ranch. The flats, which were about 4,000 feet, were all oats and alfalfa. There was a pellet mill, and there was a hay crew, all Mexicans doing the irrigation work. I don't know how many of them were legal or not.
Yeah.
They were paid cash. They had their own bunkhouse. But at any rate, I'm looking down to the ranch house, way down there, and I'm just thinking, oh, gosh. And it's just a metal roof shining, a little dot in the high desert.
Yeah.
And he says, you want to sit here and just wait? And I said, no, my horse will follow yours down. And I prayed. I honestly prayed. I said,
Wow.
this is my first day. How stinking first day of full
Yeah.
riding. And this is pathetic. I'm going to pass out. And, the ranch was 20 miles away from Winnemucca, and we're there's not any roads to where we were. And I'd really prayed just to survive. And I survived. But those first 2 weeks, getting on a saddle, you had to string a horse, ride horses, you ride them, a different horse every day, because you'd ride 15, 20 miles, mostly zigzagging. Directly, it's maybe 5 miles. Yeah, 5 miles, but, you're herding. You're going back, you're herding the cattle, stinking, stupid barn-raised cattle who weren't afraid of humans. The range cattle were great. They were only a problem at the roundup. But the rest of the time, they're away from everyone. But I'd get on that saddle in the morning and feel like getting on a spear. And my lips were chapped and bleeding. And, gosh. And we had a party line at my parents said, well, call us. And there was a party line, 8-party line. In other words, 8 people on this party line.
Wow.
So I called my mother and father, and they're saying, all right, that's enough. That's enough. And I'd gotten in some fights with some folks and so forth. And they say, you've had enough. You've proven it. You can do it. I said, no, I've hired on for the whole summer. I'm going to stay here. And
wow.
And I learned a lot from that cow boss, his perspective of the world. He had great sayings. But and I was from Virginia, so they just called me the Virginian.
Okay.
And he couldn't believe there wasn't sagebrush in Virginia. He thought the whole world was covered with sagebrush. He thought Kansas was the East. Then they had a mechanic who was an alcoholic, and he had tried to kill himself once, and he put his gun here, and it shot up, and his mouth was closed here, so he didn't kill himself. But his father was a mechanic for Blackjack Pershing. He was from New Mexico.
Wow.
For Blackjack Pershing when they were going after Pancho Villa.
Yeah.
And so listening to these stories of the cow boss was an old-time cowboy, and he knew all the history of the West.
What state were you in?
Nevada. Northern
okay.
Nevada.
Wow.
And then halfway through the summer, Mormons bought the ranch. And so they said we didn't have to work on Sunday. The cow boss said, the cattle don't know it's Sunday. So,
one of his great sayings.
Yeah. There's other sayings, which I'm not going to repeat here. And then made the mistake one time of the alcoholic mechanic. We would once in a while go into town on Saturday night. And there wasn't any washing, so you go to a laundromat to clean your clothes. And at any rate, the cow boss, the drunken mechanic, Whitey, wanted me to drive him in his truck into town to do clothes, wash all our clothes. And the cow boss said, you don't go with him. Do not go with him. He's going to get drinking. I said, all he wants to do is eat supper and do our laundry. And he said, no, you're going to get stuck. And there he sat, endlessly drinking. He only wanted me to be able to drive them home so he didn't wreck his truck on the way back to the ranch. And so the cow boss was right on that one, too. And there are a bunch of outlaws there. In those days, when someone would get run out of town for some offense, they'd go to Seattle to hire on to work for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline with it. The cow boss the only reason they hired me on in this ranch is they were in financial trouble, and the cow boss got turned in for rustling cattle of someone else, and he got turned in by 2 Mexicans for this to the Stockmen's Association. They get a $200 reward. Now this all happened before I got to the ranch, and he was mostly upset that he would not be so stupid as leave the carcass there. He would have cut out where they could find the carcass of somebody else's cattle to eat, and they did it for eating, not for wrestling it and selling it for money. And so he had previously beat up this Mexican in town, and he says, you're going to be you're a lawyer. I said, no, I'm going to law school. I'm not a lawyer. Well, what should I tell the judge? And I told him. And the judge let him off, and he just said, don't you ever get around this guy again. So he wanted to kill the stockmen And they killed the Mexicans, everyone else. And I brought my own guns with me. It's just a handgun and a rifle. And he had this, if this stock detective comes here again, I'm going to shoot him right through the head, right through I said, oh, gosh, well, I said, you're going to get killed too. He says, yeah, but I just can't take this anymore from these folks. I would not be so stupid as to leave that carcass as evidence. I would have cut out the brand. I would have burned the hide. I'm not saying I've never rustled somebody else's cattle, but I wouldn't be so stupid as to leave the evidence for it. And so I said, it is, and it was a gravel road out to the ranch, and you could see for miles away if there's some vehicle coming, and we'd be up, way out on the range, and you could see like a contrail of a plane through the sky if someone's coming, and he'd say, those stock detectives and so forth. And fortunately, they never came. He had it all planted out how he's going to kill that SOB. He'll go down. And I said, look, I have a life in front of me. Here, you can use my guns. Get at this angle, do this, you get it, and so forth. And oh gosh, then he wanted to kill. We were in town one Saturday night. He wanted to kill these two Mexicans who turned him in. And by the way, he got convicted. He ultimately got convicted for it. But the judge, because what he did, it wasn't for stealing, it was for eating. He got some sort of fine for it, but he still hated these people who turned him in. So we're in town one Saturday night, and he sees them in a corner of the place we're in. He says, "Look at that." I'm not going to say what he was calling them, but he's only going to kill them. And he says, we're going to throw them in the river. I said, the Humboldt River. They're going to find the carcasses. They're going to find the bodies. They're going to know who has the motive to have killed these people. And I'd learned enough from him about scattering the bones and this. I said, you got to get them out in the country where there's no witnesses and you can scatter the bones. The coyotes will take them. They'll never find them. Well, and he said, yeah, okay, that makes sense. This is his own logic that I had learned through the whole summer because he's the only guy I talked to other than yelling and yipping and beating cattle. And so naturally he agrees with his own logic of how to get away with doing things. And so, of course, the Mexicans would never go anywhere where there's not witnesses. For sure. So finally he gave up. They're not moving. They're not leaving. And so I figured I'd use my legal skills to avoid a murder from the enraged cow boss.
You talked him out of it by
using his own logic.
Yeah.
Which was good logic, I suppose. If
Yeah.
And there's the key out there is there's very few witnesses if you're out in the country.
Yeah, right. So was it just that one season you did out there?
Yeah, I had to work. I went back for part of the next year because then I had to actually pay attention to
your grades.
Well, no, like grades. Yeah, when I had to actually go and work, the law clerk, law firms, and all that. It was terrible training for law school because out there, if you really believed what you're arguing for, you get in a fight. Physically.
Oh, yeah.
You don't just keep debating.
Yeah.
And so, and I will admit that I did get in some fist fights in college and law school. And the thing that bothered me the most of them all is that there's one, we got in a fight. It was a fair fight. It wasn't an ambush and chipped this guy's teeth. And so I had to go into the dean's office and he wanted me to pay his dental bills. If you get in a fight and you get skinned up, you assume the risk.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was just like, what a bunch of stinking pansies way of doing things. So I had to pay his demo bill.
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, definitely a different time with fistfights and things like that back then. So any other jobs while you were in college? So law clerking, basically you went into law. You did that for all the other students too.
Well, my father made me, he wanted me to go to the D.C. and I said, I hate D.C. It's just crowded and all that. And so I interned with law for one in Alexandria and another in D.C., which was fine. Then I went out west for the rest of the summer. Then after law school, I ended up, and these are the two influential, other than my family, football and all that, the two biggest influence in my life was one, working on that ranch, because you're on your own. you could, in Nevada, almost everything's legal and you can get away with anything.
Yeah, right.
And you had to determine your own postulates of life, your own principles of what you think is right and wrong. And the only thing I had to read, I brought the Constitution with me, but the only thing that I read, not that I did a lot of reading. Didn't, get back at night and eat supper, wash down and fall asleep.
Yeah.
Get up before the sun rises and feed your horses, feed yourself, and you're on horseback all day long to late at night or late in the afternoon or early evening. No lunch or something like that. She used to eat a lot for breakfast.
Yeah.
And at any rate, the other was the job that I got after law school, which if it were up to the University of Virginia counselors, I never would have taken. I had a friend who was from Arizona, who was a law student at the University of Virginia, and he had been a law clerk for this new judge, Glenn Williams, in Southwest Virginia.
Okay.
And he says, "Oh, you'd really like this judge," and so forth. The University of Virginia counselor saying, "Oh, you don't want to go with this judge. We have contacts in Richmond and Charlotte and D.C. and all these places." And they were so he was so condescending about this judge. He said, "This judge, he's from Jonesville. And you know where that is?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, it's by the Cumberland Gap. It's further west than Detroit, Michigan. That's the middle of nowhere down there. And it's just, why would you want to be in a place like that?" And I thought, all right, I already had applied to places like law firms in Reno and Lexington, Kentucky, places like that. And after being in Nevada, this guy's saying, "Well, it's just the middle of nowhere, it's like wilderness." I said, "Well, Southwest Virginia is really settled compared to northern Nevada, which is all Bureau of Land Management land, high desert, a few small towns."
Yeah.
So to me, Southwest Virginia was hardly the middle of nowhere. It's settled. And I went down and interviewed with Judge Williams, and he hired me on. We have the highest caseload of any. This is judge for the Western District of Virginia.
Okay.
Lynchburg, Charlottesville, Danville, West.
Oh,
and I have Harrisonburg, Roanoke, Abingdon, and opened up.
This is 75?
77, 78.
Okay.
And I drove him around everywhere the case is. And he had served in World War II. He had great stories, political stories, great ways of telling great stories. He was just such a tremendous influence philosophically in my life. His common sense, his humor. I thought so much of him when I got sworn in as governor.
Okay.
I asked that Judge Williams be the person who swore me in, which is rare.
That's cool
for a federal judge to do it. But Judge Carrico was the Chief Justice.
Yeah.
He let him do it.
Wow.
And he had so many great stories. We don't have time.
Yeah.
Some of his jokes and stories and all the rest. And when, in fact, he got cheated out of an election, they have he called it a satchel ballot, that they bring in ballots marked enough votes to switch the election. And the first time I ran for office, I lost and then ran again.
And that was the state race.
Yeah,
right?
House of Delegates race.
Okay.
And then in 82, I won by a whopping 25 votes after the election. There was a recount. After the recount, it was 25. By election night, it was 18. But on recount, I was just thinking, and they bring in this manila envelope. "We have some more ballots."
Right.
I think, oh no.
Yeah.
It's the satchel ballot I'm going to get. And it wasn't. They were all unmarked. But Judge Williams was just such a great person, loved by everyone, common sense.
Wow.
As a law clerk, you'd hear these lawyers giving these arguments and citing these cases, saying, "Oh God, I'm going to have to go writing this all down. We're going to have to go research, whatever case they're doing here." And the judge would say, "Now that case is about that and such," and he'd rule. I said, "You'd just be so relieved with that."
It saved you a whole bunch of...
But you learned a lot of integrity, of humor, humility, being yourself, all of those things with Judge Williams. In fact, and the other law clerk with me with Judge Williams was Cynthia Kinzer, who is from Lee County, Pennington Gap. And when I was governor, I had the opportunity to appoint in a vacancy to the Supreme Court of Virginia. And when you're making an appointment of judges, you always wonder, these judges, they say this and then they put on the robe.
Yeah.
And they're nowhere, because I just don't like judicial activists. Judges are to interpret and apply the law, not to invent the law.
Yeah.
Or use their own political bias. So Cynthia and I would talk a lot, as law clerks, about philosophy, legal philosophy, and all that. So I was very comfortable. I knew that what Cynthia was saying to me while I'm interviewing people, you could believe it. And so she got confirmed to get on the Supreme Court, and ultimately became the first female Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia.
No kidding.
And that's from Judge Williams.
Wow.
And my father and my whole family loved Judge Williams. Just the way he talked, his accent, his storytelling.
Did he influence you to run for the General Assembly, or how did you?
Well, you couldn't get involved in things. Interestingly, he wanted me. I was thinking of running possibly for Attorney General before I ran for Congress in a surprise election. And he says, you ought to run for governor. And he and a bunch of guys in the coalfields part of far southwest Virginia were the ones because I was going around the state for a constitutional amendment that I had proposed for many years, finally got it done. The constitutional amendments in Virginia have to be approved by the voters, ultimately.
Like referendum or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how the Constitution's amended. And this amendment was to allow law enforcement to use drug dealers' assets that are connected with illegal drug dealing and use it, seize them and have the forfeiture of them, and then use the proceeds for paying making undercover drug buys, informants, and so forth. To me, it was like catching sharks and cutting them up for bait to catch more sharks.
Yes, right.
Remember, use the taxpayers' money for surveillance costs or overtime or paying informants or whatever all.
Yeah.
So you needed that, but it needed to be a constitutional amendment. And there's a federal forfeiture statute, but I wanted to have a state one so you don't have to give the money to the federal government, keep it in Virginia. So I was going around the state promoting that, which ultimately passed. And that's when, in the midst of a side meeting outside of it, Judge Williams and some of his good buddies said I should run for governor. The first election, though, is the one I remember the most because that I won.
That was delegate.
Yeah, delegate.
Okay.
I'd lost the first time I ran, and you learn a lot by losing.
Yeah.
You could go to all the campaign schools you want, but you don't know what it's like until you actually get out there and ask people for their vote. So my mother thinks politics is demeaning. They're all unethical and meaning and all that. My father loved the competition of it. So he's there for that 1982 election, and we're waiting for the results to come in. And my district was Albemarle County, which is not the city, but around Charlottesville.
Okay.
And Nelson County, which is to the south of it. It's where the TV show The Waltons was Nelson County. It's where Wintergreen, Livingston, all of that.
All right.
And so we're waiting for these results to come in, and it's WINA radio, and they're saying we're still waiting for Gladstone and Montebello to come in Nelson County. And if these precincts, and I was ahead.
Okay.
And they said, if these places vote the way they normally vote for the last 8 elections, Alan, and I was running against a chairman, Jim Murray, who was chairman of a committee and been in for 9 years or something like that. And they said, well, if these come in, they vote the way they normally do, Alan, Murray will surpass Alan. His lead won't hold up. So we're waiting, and they're waiting for these to come in. My father's saying, what did you do? Where did you campaign? Did you go to these precincts? And I said, well, I went up to Montebello once. He said, you should have gone twice. I said, Dad, all there is a trout hatchery up there. There's about 45 votes. Well, you should have gone again. I said, well, what about Gladstone? I said, went there several times. I was only the Republican who was there. All for the voter sign up. They're all Democrats, but they thought I brought in the donuts that they had there because I'd greet them outside. Yeah. And say, oh, have a pastry, have a donut in there. You come out and say, thank you. It was the Democrats who actually had the donut.
Okay.
So at any rate, the votes finally come in. and I didn't lose it as bad as Republicans normally lose these precincts.
Okay.
So I win by 18 votes, and Alan wins by 18 votes. And my father's reaction was, gosh, this is as good as beating Dallas. Now, for my father, that is just, I mean, it's...
Yeah, nothing better in the world.
Yeah, beating Dallas.
Yeah.
And so that was that.
And the recount wound up being 25.
Yeah, it picked up 7 votes, went from a landslide to a mandate.
So how long were you in the...
Susan, who later became my wife, was at the University of South Carolina, and so her parents took a liking to me for whatever reason and sent her an absentee ballot. So the reality is, if I'd lost a second time, if 13 people voted differently, I would say that's it. But the reason I got involved in it wasn't so much Judge Williams, who said I should run for governor, is getting into politics was because when I was at the University of Virginia, I was in law school at the time. It was after I'd been in Nevada, bunkering and all. I get a call from Governor Reagan asking me, this is in late 1975, early 76, to head up Young Virginians for Reagan.
Wow.
And I told Governor Reagan, I said, this is a great honor that you're asking me to do this, but I know nothing about organized politics. I wasn't in the college Republicans. I took no political science courses. And I said, I like debating. I like arguing with people. I like telling folks what a great job you did as governor and have great ideas for the country's future. And he said, well, just keep doing that. I said, all right, I'll do it. And we won Virginia. Yeah. We beat Ford in Virginia. Obviously, Ford won the whole the nomination.
Yeah.
And they went on to lose to Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
But that was my first involvement. It comes from Reagan coming to a Rams practice in 1966.
Yeah.
10 years later, who would have known that he asked me to get involved in politics, because I had no interest. I liked issues, no question about it, and debating and ideas and so forth. But it was the people who were involved in that Reagan campaign of 76, who, when I started my law practice in Charlottesville in 79, who inveigled, persuaded me to run Ford. So it was those seasoned Reagan people who got me involved in
That's
politics.
incredible. And I'm sure you've interacted then with Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some Reagan? Reagan's he is, I think, the best president of the modern time. He's one of my favorites. As a matter of fact, do you recognize that slogan right there? It's I'll leave it next to the coffee cup.
Whoop.
So
it can be done.
It can be done. So I bought that from the Reagan library in Simi Valley, California. He had that on his desk in the Oval Office.
It's amazing how much can get accomplished if you don't worry about who takes credit.
Right.
I also have a Reagan plaque, that Reagan appointed my father as chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports.
Yeah.
And he had a plaque that said, if not us, who? If not now, when? And my father had that plaque, and then when he died, my mother said I should have it. And I had that on my mantle in the Jefferson's Capitol as governor and in my Senate office. And the words of, if not us, who? If not now, when? Are words of action.
Sure.
That you take responsibility. You're in here to do something. You're not here just to warm a seat or say you're a governor, you're a senator, or whatever. You're there to do something.
Yeah. Wow.
And I still have that. I have right now. So Reagan... And now, I mean, we're going through all these things, the Reagan stories. I am now chairman of the Reagan Range Board of Governors. I'm Reagan Range Presidential Scholar for the Young Americas Foundation. We are preserving Reagan's Rancho del Cielo. That was the Western White House. When he was president, he spent 1 out of every 8 days as president there. He signed the biggest tax cut ever at the Reagan Ranch. If you go to the Reagan Ranch, the library's fantastic. The ranch is where you understand who Reagan was as a person. I love how he had McCulloch chainsaws, and they don't make McCullochs anymore. But that's what I had, is McCulloch chainsaws back.
I remember the commercials with the beaver, I think.
Well, the McCulloch chainsaws, and when I lived in a log house in Earlysville, while I was a delegate on a gravel road and so forth, but before I was governor. But at any rate, he's got Skippy and Jif peanut butter jars with nuts and bolts and nails and screws in it. And it's a very modest place. He did his own work, rode his horses, all of that there. And we've also bought his boyhood home in Dixon, Illinois.
Wow. Okay.
Reagan is always thought of as a Westerner.
Yeah.
From the Westerns. He's governor of California and all that. But his roots are Midwestern, wholesome Midwestern.
Yeah, he was a lifeguard on the Rock River.
You got it.
Yeah.
Way to go.
Yeah, well, I grew up not far from there. Rock River runs right through Wisconsin. So, so not far from there at all.
Well, good for you to actually, you're the only person I think I've run into in Virginia or any outside of Illinois.
Yeah.
Who knows where the Rock or Dixon, Illinois is, much less the Rock River.
Yeah.
But that's his humility. You know, Midwesterners are generally it's a wholesome small town.
For sure.
Is, not bragging. He would always talk about, we did this.
Yeah.
This is good for our country. It's never saying I'm the greatest or no one was better. None of that type of folks. It's that Midwestern humility, humbleness, wholesomeness to him. And so Reagan, met him many, many times. And
that's incredible.
But the best was he went to Rams practice, and it was wonderful for my father to be chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports, and I feel to some extent carrying on it's an honor to be chair of the Reagan Ranch and preserving a presidential home. You get to know who George Washington was. Yeah, going to Mount Vernon and all his different
because he's very accessible for us here in Virginia.
Sure, and his distillery and his threshing machines.
Jefferson and Monticello.
Go to Monticello and all his inventions and his interests in botany and weather and architecture. And so keeping the Reagan Ranch, which is not open to the public because it would just wear it out, but still we call it the Reagan Schoolhouse.
Wow.
And the Young America's Foundation is focused on young people. College, high school.
How do you manage it? Do you do tours of young Americans? Or?
Yeah, no, if you were there, Bob, I'd ask I called Andrew Coffin, I call him the ranch boss.
Okay.
But to have a tour, and so you have guided tours.
Okay.
It would, if you had thousands of people going through every day, they'd just wear the thing
for sure
out because it's not very big. It's got, I guess you could say, 2 bedrooms in it. The bed is actually put together with zip ties with it. The shower's a stall shower.
No kidding.
The first time they went in there, you think they're still living there, the way the clothes are hanging in the closet. They say, oh, you could go in and see their shower. He's got a Liberty Bell on it. So you got a Liberty Bell. It's a stall shower. It's so small. I said, how can he even move around without hitting his elbow?
Yeah.
With it. And so it's a beautiful property, great property. Yeah. But the abode was once a Mexican property in it, but it's a small adobe place. I get acorns from the live oak there, and under which he signed, under this tree, he signed the biggest tax cut. And Virginia Beach is about the only place where live oak trees grow in Virginia.
Okay.
And so I've get them sprouted, and I have one in our yard here in Virginia.
That's cool.
I got 2 others in the shed that are just sprouts about this tall.
Okay.
But I have one that's about this tall that's still growing. So
that's cool. That is cool. I'm going to try. So for the listeners at home and for people on YouTube, you can't see, but I'm pointing to a picture I got hanging on the wall back there. I don't know if you recognize that, Governor, but that's Air Force One, the one in the middle there.
Oh, is that Simi Valley?
That's Simi Valley, exactly.
This is at the library. Those library folks are great.
Yeah.
You were asking me Reagan stories. My father's being chairman of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and Sports, and I was up there at the White House with him where he wanted to present barbells to Ronald Reagan. And this was after Reagan was shot.
Okay.
And so prior to it, all the staff people are saying, just keep them in the box, just give it to him. He said, no, I want the president to see these chrome covered, uncoated and whatever was inscribed on the barbells. So I'm telling the story at the Reagan Ranch.
Okay.
Excuse me, at the Reagan Library.
Okay.
And I said, the fun part of all this is that the staff was saying, no, do not show him these. If he sees him, he's going to grab him and he's going to put him over his head. And he's not to do that because they shot in the ribs and this, that, and the other. So my father goes out there, presents it to Ronald Reagan and says, and Mr. President, here we have these barbells for you to stay fit and all that. Reagan sees them. He grabs them, puts them up over his head, and they have a picture of my father just wide open, laughing, and Reagan doing this. And the reason he's laughing so much is this is exactly what the staff wanted to avoid. They didn't want this to happen. They knew Reagan good enough. If he sees it, he's going to grab him and naturally have to do it.
That's awesome.
And of course, he was perfectly fine doing it. And it is typical of staff trying to control things
for sure.
Much with it. So,
yeah, for sure.
But just telling that story, before it wasn't even a half an hour later, the folks at that Reagan Library said, here, is this the picture you're talking? Is this what you? I said, that's exactly it. So they have everything Reagan did as president.
Yeah, it's it's the only presidential library I've been to. And it was I was in the Navy at the time, and I was in California doing other stuff, and I was like, I was in Port Hueneme, which is very close. So half an hour drive, whatever. And I was like, this is the chance of a lifetime. I'm not missing out on.
All right, next time. Go up to Santa Barbara. We have the Reagan Ranch Center. It's in Santa Barbara, right next to the railroad tracks in an old hotel.
Okay.
And they got pieces of the Berlin Wall, and it's all Reagan ranch-related things. Some great films. It's not the library, which is presidential.
Right.
But I think the next time you go out there, go to the
I'd love to,
Reagan Ranch Center in Santa Barbara.
Absolutely love to see it.
Or if you're back in Illinois, go to Dixon and see his boyhood home.
Well, my mom is still with us, and she lives in Jefferson, Wisconsin. So I fly into Chicago to go visit my mom a couple times a year. So I think I will.
Last summer,
because from Chicago, it's probably less than a 60-minute drive.
It's a little bit further than that.
Is it?
But it's not that far. It's flat country.
Road.
Yeah. Last summer, there was the premiere of the movie Reagan. Dennis Quaid played Reagan.
Yeah, I saw it.
And it's just a great movie. And they did the premiere, and I actually presented a belt buckle and a hat, a Reagan hat to Dennis Quaid into this old theater that in 1941 or 42, there was a premiere of a Reagan movie. Back then, he came back to his hometown in the early 1940s. It was the same theater, holds 900 people, and showed Reagan the movie. Of course, there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
Yeah, right.
Watching,
for sure,
especially the ending where they show Reagan in his last ride at his range with it.
Wow,
playing Country Roads.
Yeah.
Which makes me.
I remember that scene because that's when whoever was with him said, You can't do this.
John Barletta.
Yeah, he said you can't do this anymore.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, incredible.
John Barletta, we got to know John Barletta, and he rode with Reagan. And
he was the Secret Service guy, right? Yeah.
But he was one who could ride.
Yeah, that's right.
Secret Service don't know how to ride.
Right.
It's just not
for sure.
But he died just a few years ago, and his ashes are on the ranch.
No
which
kidding.
Is perfect.
That is so perfect. What a tale from, it's an American tale. It's a political tale. It's a just incredible story through and through. I mean, he lived an incredible life, challenged alcoholic father. Mm-hmm. He grew up with challenge, but he had moral and ethical character that just drove his being. And so awesome. I want to take a minute to tell you about my book titled Elevate Your Leadership, How to Develop, Maintain, and Advance Lifelong Leadership. This book is based on my 26 years in U.S. Navy Special Operations and now 13 years in the private sector. Leadership is a perishable skill and a personal brand. In part 1, I guide you through building and applying your personal brand of leadership. Leadership also requires physical energy and mental clarity. In part 2, I go over the 6 key components of health and wellness and how you can apply these components every single day to become a great leader. This book is also breathable. What does that mean? It's 170 pages, 12-point font, with charts and graphs and pictures to break up the monotony of reading page after page. Finally, this book is available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and of course, RobertPizzini.com. Folks, I want to take a minute and talk about Breeden Construction. Breeden Construction built iFly Virginia Beach 10 years ago, and our building is solid. Why? Building a standard. Our standard is excellence. Visionary thinking, innovative design, dynamic solutions, and transformative growth. While others may see lofty ideals, we see the very foundation needed to construct a better future. This isn't just a promise we make to you, it's the standard we uphold. This is Breeden Construction. Learn more at breedenconstruction.com. Headquartered in Virginia with offices throughout Virginia and North Carolina, you can contact Breeden Construction directly at area code 804-364-4600. Breeden Construction, a national general contractor. We've been talking for over an hour and a half, and we haven't even got to what it's like to be governor of the state of Virginia yet. So let's transition a little bit. So you came up through the Virginia Assembly. You were a delegate, and then at some point you decided, I'm going to run for governor. Talk about that and how that.
Well, that was inadvertent. I'd gotten elected. I'd been in the House of Delegates, had Mr. Jefferson's seat in the House of Delegates.
Okay.
Jefferson's seat. The delegate from Hanover is Patrick Henry's seat.
That's incredible.
Thomas Jefferson's seat.
Yeah.
So then there's a special election for Congress in the 7th Congressional District, which was generally the Piedmont to Hanover to the northern Shenandoah Valley, Prince William. It was probably western Prince William and Manassas were in it. At any rate, it's a special snap election. We had a fight for the nomination. I was able to prevail over the congressman who was retiring midterm son.
Okay.
So that was quite a battle.
Sure.
But we won the nomination, won the election. This was 1991. It was a special election.
Uh-huh.
And it was so exhilarating to be in the Capitol. You're getting sworn in. You're only one. You're not one of 435.
Right.
The magnificent United States Capitol, architecture and the artwork and all that is just exhilarating. And within 2 weeks, the Democrats were doing redistricting in Virginia, and they put me. Most people couldn't find the log house we lived on a gravel road in between Free Union and Earlysville in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains on a gravel road. The Democrats found where my house was. So they stuck my home in with Tom Bliley, a congressman, longtime congressman, Republican, from the Richmond area. Then they took most of my district and put it in with Frank Wolf, another Republican. They took another part of the district and put it in with Herb Bateman, who was another Republican. And anyway, they split it up 5 different ways. And some people said, well, you ought to move across the mountain and run in the 6th district.
Mm-hmm.
And the Democrats thought, well, Alan wants to stay in, you're going to end up with a cockfight amongst 2 Republicans. And we'll get rid of one of them that way. Uh-huh. And I said, I'm not going to run against Tom Bliley. And I just said, I'm not going to move. It just didn't seem right to just move to stay into Congress. And folks said, run for governor. And if they had not done that redistricting, I would have been happy to stay as a new member of the House of Representatives. And so we started off that race for governor. We were 31% behind. We had no money. We were running against Mary Sue Terry, who'd been twice elected by big margins as Attorney General.
Okay.
She had tons of money, but we had I called it a grassroots insurgency.
Sure.
We had the ideas of let's get truth in sentencing, welfare reform, that able-bodied people ought to work, not be rewarded by idle behavior. The truth in sentencing, crime rates were really bad in Virginia in those days. Richmond was a murder capital. And she would talk about a 5-day waiting period for buying guns. And I'd said, look, we've had an 8-year waiting period for you to do something about this. 5 days, I see you incarcerate all the guns you want. And if the criminals are still out on the streets, not behind bars, they're going to be.
They're going to find a gun. And
3 out of 4 violent crimes are committed by repeat offenders. So we had a great campaign of volunteers based on an audacious agenda, and we ended up winning with 58% of the vote.
Okay.
And it was just a great win. The Democrats were still in control of the legislature, but we found Democrats to sponsor truth in sentencing with abolition parole, welfare reform, all the major initiatives. We had to get it done on a bipartisan basis, but it helps to run on ideas and issues and an agenda so that if you win, these folks are saying, all right, yeah, Alan won, I won, so my voters are also voting for him, and you keep your word. So it's nothing more important, in my view, this is leadership, than integrity.
For sure.
Never make a promise unless you intend to keep it.
Yeah.
And if you may need more information, say, give me some more evidence, I'd like to learn more. But they gave me a stack of all my promises in a folder after election. And when do you want to? What was the prioritization? It was year 1, year 2, or year 3. We didn't have year 4. Year 4 would be whatever we didn't get done with it. And so the first year, I mean, we started at a full gallop with a loose cinch, and to get things done. And we had a special session on truth in sentencing. I didn't want him killing this bill at midnight when no one's paying attention in the courts committee. We had to settle a lawsuit with military and federal retirees. So we got a lot done that first
What was
year.
the makeup of the House of Delegates in the Senate? Did you have one or the other as Republican?
No,
Neither.
Both were. Moss was a speaker, Democrat, on a topic. So they had the majority there, and they had the majority in the Senate. And what the other thing that was so bad is it wasn't if the Republicans, it was say 22 Democrats, 18 Republicans in the Senate, but they didn't have proportional representation on the committees. So you have the Finance Committee, there'd be 12 Democrats and 3 Republicans.
Yeah, right.
And the House was, it was fairly close. But they had the majority, so we had to get Glenn Croshaw or Virgil Goode or Clancy Holland or different Democrats to co-sponsor things with Bob McDonnell, Randy Forbes from this area.
Right.
So you'd have a Republican and Democrat to break it, because if the Democrats just voted lockstep, everything's going to get killed.
That's right.
And so I knew that you can't agree. There'd be certain Democrats, I said, they're not going to be with us on this, but it may be that Glenn Croshaw or Tom Forehand, they might be with us on this, or Clancy Holland.
Okay.
Might be with us on this.
Okay.
They're not going to be with us on something else.
Yeah.
So you really had to work with those legislators. And it actually, so we were very successful. We got 90% of what we want to get done.
Okay.
And some were prayers being answered. But if you get initiatives passed on a bipartisan basis, they endure. If it's just getting rammed through, like it's not an executive order, but But if you ram it through, as soon as there's a switch, they're going to wipe it out.
That's right.
They both bought in. Mark Warner, when he was governor, kept our standards of learning and accountability with it, because it was bipartisan. It was hard to do. There's certain decisions you make, and I know this is on leadership. And you want to stick to your promises. Keep your promises. Stick to your principles. Judge issues based on the merits of the idea, not personality, not process, not partisanship. The merits of an idea. My first year, we got through a bill on parental notification for an unwed minor daughter having an abortion.
Okay.
And this is something I was for as a delegate. It's something the people of Virginia are for. They may have different views on abortion, but they do think parents ought to be involved if an unwed minor daughter is going through the trauma of an abortion.
For sure.
Parents have to give permission for an ear piercing or an aspirin in schools. Gosh, you're going to go through this surgery. They should know.
For sure.
So the Democrats would kill this bill year after year after year in the Senate. It passed the House. They'd kill it in the Senate using maneuvers, killing it in a committee, never getting a floor vote on it, because there were a few Democrats who were for this, and all the Republicans were. So this first year, they get this bill through, but it allows notification of brothers and relatives And I said, this is really not truly a parental notification.
Yeah,
bill.
right.
You could notify an older brother in a frat house or, an uncle in Las Vegas. That's not true parental notification. So I brought Kate James in, who was my cabinet secretary for Health and Human Resources, and someone named Ann Kincaid, and they're pro-life folks, leaders in our administration.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, my worry with this is if I sign this, it's not a true parental notification bill, and we'll never be able to get, it'll be said as a big success that this is passed, and we'll never get a true one. If I veto this, the way it's characterized, they're going to say Alan didn't keep his promises, and folks will feel betrayed. And I said, what do you think? And they said, whatever you do, we'll back you, whatever you do. And they said, it's your decision. We'll back you, whatever your decision is. They just went through all the calculations.
Yeah.
So they left my office there in Mr. Jefferson's Capitol. And I literally prayed, closed my eyes, prayed, and then opened my eyes, looked out over the hill down, and there was an American flag flying in the wind. And I said, all right, that's the sign. That means integrity. That means honesty. And so I said, I got to veto this bill. And so we got through it. Okay, no one thought I betrayed him. But then year after year, we'd get this bill killed. It never would get through again.
Okay.
And so my last year as governor, and I'd go to sleep at night just think, maybe I should have signed that. I just second guessing myself. I should have signed it. At least it would have been something better than nothing.
Yeah.
And so the last year, Thelma Drake from around here.
For sure.
Yeah, carried this bill, and the clerk, Susan Shar of the Senate, made a ruling that allowed it to be an amendment. The whole point was she made a ruling that allowed a Senate floor vote on it.
Okay.
And so it passed. It was my last year as governor, and it was really my favorite bill signing.
Okay.
There were thousands of people at that Capitol where I had prayed, what's the right thing to do? They were all there for a principle. We opened up the governor's mansion. I shook hands with every single one who came through. And it just was so satisfying that ultimately, the guidance from prayer or maybe seeing a sign, whatever, it all worked out.
Wow. So that was the one. So out of your big stack of promises that your staff had you.
Yeah, we got our truth in sentencing. The school performance report cards, juvenile justice.
Yeah.
That was when, it wasn't the biggest of all issues. I mean, it's not monumental. Although there have been 17 years, people have been trying to get that bill through and finally got it through.
Yeah. Wow. I asked Governor Bob McDonnell the same question, but what was your biggest challenge as governor and your biggest accomplishment as governor? And it could be the same thing,
Biggest challenge, there wasn't enough hours in the day to do everything you wanted to do.
Okay, sure.
So you had to prioritize your time.
Mm-hmm.
My priority was economic development.
Okay.
Because I think the best social program of all is a job. Yeah. If someone has a job, they're providing for themselves and their family.
That's right.
And we wanted independent lives, not people dependent on government.
Okay, all right.
So I looked at my schedule at the end, my scheduler, the end of my term, and this is waking hours, that I spent more waking hours with Bob Skunda, our Secretary of Commerce and Trade, than I did with my wife, Susan, who was also working all the time on, especially focusing on tourism. And she's great at it. So there's just, we got virtually everything that we wanted to get done. I would have liked to cut taxes more. Definitely more. The regulatory reform was great. We systematically, methodically went through every regulation in Virginia to determine what's the purpose of it. Do you have to have it? What's duplicative? Is there a better way of doing it? So forth. And after that, and you mentioned this, 71% of the regulations were either eliminated or repealed or amended, which is what President Trump's trying to do.
For sure. Yep.
Bob McDonnell, by the way, years later as governor, was doing the same thing. And someone said to me, "Oh, Bob McDonnell's copying what you did as governor." I said, "Yeah, great. I guarantee you in the 9 subs or however many years later, 8
Right.
8
All the
years, 10
regulations
years later,
put back
I
in.
guarantee you in 10 years, there's better ways of doing things. There's constant improvement. You got to be willing to change, adapt, innovate, and improve. And there's always a better way of doing things.
For sure.
I had a poster in my office and all our cabinet secretaries' offices of wild horses, Mustangs, galloping over the open range. And the saying under it is either make dust or eat dust.
Wow.
You want to be a leader.
Yeah.
You don't want to be eating dust. We want Virginia to be a leader. And not that you can't learn good ideas from other states. That's the beauty of the laboratories of innovation and democracy.
Oh, for sure. Oh,
and they're still,
yeah.
Well, yeah. And somebody's done something stupid. Why would you want to do that? Look at those idiots up in,
California
or New York or New Jersey or stinking, Chicago. Illinois become a loser
For sure.
in population. And it's unfortunately too governed by Chicago. The rest of the state's great.
Yeah.
With it. So at any rate, the biggest challenge was there wasn't enough time to do everything we wanted to do.
Okay.
The successes were the record job creation. I love the fact that we put in high academic standards and accountability. Education so important. Promoting families, a pro-family, pro-work welfare reform. We cut our welfare rolls by 50%.
Wow.
And we counted the way we looked at success in welfare is not how many people are getting a check, it's how many people are leading independent, self-reliant lives. And also with hopefully a father around.
For sure.
We had child support enforcement added to it. We made women who came onto welfare, first of all, if they were on welfare with children, they'd get 0 if they got another child while on welfare.
Okay.
We got sued on it, but won.
Yeah.
We said if you don't identify who the father is, you get 0. It is amazing how many memories were refreshed by that.
Okay.
Going, here's where he lives. And this is from listening to social service folks, Culpeper and so forth.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's really worked. Now they know the address, what kind of car he drives. Here's his license plate. And we had, and we probably still do, have the highest paternity identification in the country. It was 99%.
Holy cow.
Because if a father's not going to be there for their child, they're at least going to be there responsible financially rather than by the taxpayers. So cutting the welfare rolls, I mean, there's literally hundreds of millions of dollars saved for the taxpayers. But more importantly, there's hundreds of thousands of people where they're working rather than being dependent on a check from the government. So that mattered a lot.
For sure.
The criminal justice, we had for a long time in Virginia, the 3rd, 4th best, lowest violent crime rate. We were number 1 or number 2 at the recidivist rate, repeat offender rate. Mm-hmm. That's how you measure truth in sentencing. Mm-hmm. And I also remember these 2 women during the campaign where first one talks about being raped. So you're listening to that story. And they convicted whoever, the rapist. Next woman, Linda Pittman, speaks, and she said, well, I was coming home one day and this person, stranger in our house, she got raped by him. It was the same rapist who raped the first woman.
Oh, wow.
That if he served the sentence rather than a 10-year sentence being 2.5 years, because it's dishonest parole system where people are serving a quarter of their sentence.
Right.
And so if he was serving his sentence, he would not have been in Linda Pittman's home with it. And so the fact that there's however many thousands of people who are not a rape victim or a victim of crime, because our violent crime rate is way down, and they're behind bars, and there's truth in sentencing. So you hear that somebody's gotten a 10-year sentence. Sure, they could get 15% off if they get a GED and behave. You have to have slight, but not reduce their sentence by 3/4 or more. And that's great for law enforcement. It's great for society. And it's great for safety.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things that you do, all made Virginia a better place to live and learn and work and to raise their families. And it also got Virginia more competitive. Part of the problem with Virginia, there's a saying about how many Virginians does it take to change a light bulb?
I haven't heard this one. No.
Right. 5.
Okay.
1 to change a light bulb, and 4 to talk about how great the old light bulb was. And so part of the problem is Virginia. Virginia's great. You don't need to use these incentives. We don't need all this promotion and so forth. And I said, yeah, Virginia is great, but so's Tennessee, so's North Carolina, so's South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And Virginia is part of in a competition between the states. I think Governor Youngkin clearly understands this.
Yeah.
But
for sure.
Virginia needed, I think people enjoyed competing. And I was just over Newport News had innovated machine and tool that they used in Enterprise Zone for it. And there were 5 enterprise zones in all of Virginia when I came in as governor. This is a Jack Kemp idea, another football player who played at Occidental, which was a rival of Whittier. Okay. Believe it or not. So he's good friends with our family. Anyway, enterprise zones are prompt permitting, lower taxes, less regulations. Mm-hmm. And so we increased it to 50 enterprise zones in Virginia. I said, why don't we make the whole state an enterprise zone?
Right.
That was just too much. No, we can't overlay the whole state, but we'll go with you. We'll go along with you on 50 enterprise zones. And so we designated 45 of them, kept 5 back because you'd use it for an inducement to getting Frito-Lay into Lynchburg or whatever. Let's use an enterprise zone to get them in. It's like a card to use, for incentives. But it was so great that it was just an innovative tool, and they're expanding, and they use the enterprise zone with it. I also like to quote Terry McAuliffe, a Democrat governor, where they had just gotten something in an enterprise zone. He says, since this was put into effect in 1996, over $1 billion have been invested in enterprise zones and 40,000 new jobs created. He didn't give credit to Allen. Okay, I tell Terry, I said, I love using you as a quote of validation that lower taxes, and here you are touting $1 billion. It's not me bragging on myself. I'm just quoting you, Terry.
Cool.
So but it shows lower taxes, prompt permitting, less regulations.
Yeah,
induces more investment, more jobs.
Yeah. Do you see him from time to time?
Not as much as I did before, but
okay.
I run into him every now and then.
Okay, all right. He came here when he was governor. He came here to iFly Virginia Beach.
Oh, great.
I think his son was probably 14 or 15 at the time. And
good. I get along with Terry. We have different points of view of things.
Yeah.
There are Democrats that you enjoy debating with. And Terry's fun. We agree on probably not much of anything. Right. There's a few things we'll agree on. But there's a kind of a bump and run you can do with him, and he's not one.
He gets it.
Yeah, he'll get it, and he'll get upset, and I'll say, get over it, or do it back to me. And, that's what's missing, I think, somewhat in politics.
Thick skin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
God, Bob, I said, what's missing? In politics, you need thick skin, a sense of humor.
Yep.
And
you need it in business too. That's just, it's kind of like a basic man skill, I think. I mean, if you want to be successful as a business person, no matter what your endeavor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's critical. So, you mentioned leadership a few times, and I appreciate you, bringing us back to really why we're sitting down and having this discussion, because your leadership is critical for others to learn going forward, to learn from. And the one thing I ask all guests is your definition of the word leadership, and it changes over time for people depending on what you're doing, what you're in charge of, what experiences you've had. But, given your present day, what you're doing today and looking back, how would you define that word? What's George Allen's operative definition of the word leadership?
I was always told as a kid, be a leader, don't be a follower.
Okay.
That was one of the things for my father. I told you about make dust, don't eat dust.
Yeah.
So forth. I think a leader is one who, with integrity and absolute commitment, that you only get that genuine commitment with integrity, as opposed to tactical or situational.
Yeah.
There has to be a genuine desire to do something, to reform something with an initiative. And a leader has that idea or that goal or that mission. Then you need to assemble around you people who are loyal, trustworthy, who share that passion to get it done.
Yeah.
My father would always say, I don't want to have to coach the coaches, his assistant coaches. When I was governor, I wanted people who were cabinet secretaries who knew more than I did in their particular area. Rob Martinez in transportation with the Public-Private Transportation Act, a lot of these regulatory reforms, he knew shipping, rail, air, roads. Great. Kay James with Health and Human Resources. She grew up on welfare. She could say things I couldn't say.
Okay.
And a variety of people. But if I'm the smartest one at the table, we're not gaining anything. Everyone knew what the goal was. They knew my philosophy. It's a common sense, Jeffersonian, conservative principle, Reagan-esque ideas with the integrity of Crockett to stand for what you believe in.
Okay.
And those are my heroes, Jefferson, Reagan, Crockett.
Okay.
Reagan, obviously the most contemporaneous of them all.
For sure.
But but you as a leader, you have to have the judgment and willingness to have people around you who know more than you do and have that same mission. And then you have to have measurement. Where you're going, just saying, oh yeah, we're working hard.
Yeah.
Or yeah, great working hard. What's the results? What's the measurement?
What's that Churchill quote? All these wonderful strategies should we should gauge the results from time to time. I'm totally
perfect.
Yeah, but
whatever it is, I don't know what the quote is, but exactly
all these brilliant strategies we have, we should occasionally look at the results.
Yeah, you could say our football team has some great designs. We're running great plays. How many points have we scored? Yeah. It's still a 0 up there. Or isn't this a great game? Well, we only scored 10 points.
Yeah.
And so forth. So, and then you got to have a passion and an enthusiasm. I think that comes from the genuineness of whatever your mission is of a leader. And you just fight and you have to adapt, innovate, improve as you go through it, but you want a good team. And then the other thing is when you succeed, whatever your mission is, whatever that goal was, celebrate it. Celebrate success. And then a year later, even celebrate success. Remind people of what they're doing. That'll help not only ensure the longevity or the endurance of whatever reform, whatever your goal might have been. It inspires people in the future to say, hey, they did that, we can do that, or we can do that for our next mission, our next endeavor.
Yeah, for sure. Yes, inspire. So I love it. So have integrity, have commitment, be very, demonstrate that, make sure everybody sees it, make sure everybody's on board with it, and then
and assemble a good batch of people around you.
Yeah. There's no doubt about that. Yeah.
And there's things you can do yourself, and you have to lead, and you have to work harder than anybody else. That helps motivate everyone else.
For sure.
But
set the example, yeah.
And the best thing in life, the happiness in life, I think comes from doing things that are meaningful and doing it with people who you like and enjoy working with.
For sure.
There's just nothing better and that's why people like team sports, and you have people retired from sports and they say, I just miss the locker room. I miss all of that.
Absolutely.
In business and in different endeavors, whether it's in government or out of government. But if you have a team together that what you're trying to do is really meaningful and you enjoy the people you're working with, gosh, there's nothing better.
No, there's
nothing better.
That's a fact. 26 years in Navy Special Operations, small teams around the world, to include, Iraq, war zone, etc. And sometimes you want to kill your teammates, but at the end of the day, that they either have or will save your life, literally, or in business they have or will save your ass, depending on what's going on. And I have 40 teammates here at iFly.
And you all respect one another too.
100%.
And each has a different job to do, and every one of those jobs is important.
Everyone. I tell my team, the newest member of this team, somebody we just hired a day ago, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, they're customer-facing employees.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
We deliver a product and service to customers, and those customer-facing employees are the most important aspect of that interaction. And so I don't care if you're the newest person or if you don't spend a lot of time with customers, but you engage in our accounting function, for example. Everything is critical to the organization. Everybody has a voice in my organization.
Yep. In fact, in the Senate office, and heck, this was in the governor's office as well. Bill Crutchfield of Crutchfield Electronics, he said, the expectations are not the expectations of us; it's the expectations of your customers. My view was always that the owners of the Virginia government are the people. It's not some department or some agency or some commission. The people are the owners. And so we wanted to have that customer service approach to everything. And especially in the Senate office, because you're up in Washington and all that. And the most important people would be these interns answering phones. I said, look, you got to be considerate. They can be yelling and screaming. Keep calm. Say thank you, ma'am, or thank you, sir. I'll make sure we get that message. I said, these folks are really important because you can email people and you can send letters, but someone's calling. And usually the people you deploy to answering calls are not the ones who are analyzing legislation.
That's right.
Or some legal aspect or composing legislation or all the rest. So you're right. That's vitally important. It's like in a football team or any team. If the assistant equipment manager screws up, it doesn't matter what your game plan is if you don't got the right equipment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
To play.
Back to the USA 1980 USA Olympic hockey team. Ralph Cox was the last skater to be cut from the team. So really dramatic moment in the movie. Folks at home, if you haven't seen Miracle on Ice with Kurt Russell, it's you don't have to be a hockey fan. And I've promoted this movie. I don't get paid to promote this movie. But it's an incredible movie. You don't have to be a hockey fan. It's an incredible story. So if you want to feel good, if you want to watch a great movie with your kids, watch Miracle on Ice about the 1980, the greatest sporting event in the history of the world, the 1980 USA Olympic hockey team.
Well, the greatest upset, it sure was. I mean, they were bringing it back this just now with the Canada-USA, which is a great all-star game.
Yeah.
I mean, it just made the all-star game like the Olympics.
For sure.
And get the motivation, President Trump fired up the Canadiens, the team. He provided bulletin board material for the Canadians who beat the USA. So you don't insult hockey players or their country. I mean, they were fired up. This was not just a regular the motion all-star game.
Oh, big time.
This is like a gold medal game.
Yeah. Well, and that fight between both Tkachuk brothers.
On the beginning of it?
Yeah. So absolutely incredible. Okay, so we're up towards the end of your time as governor, and then you ran for U.S. Senate. You were successful. How did that transition take place while you were governor? I imagine you said, I think I'm going to run for U.S. Senate. Well,
there was a time in between. So my term ended in early January of 1998. And I worked I was a partner with the McGuire Woods law firm, which was interesting. I'd always had my own law firm, small law firm in Charlottesville. I started myself and bought an old house, built in 1814 and renovated it myself, leased it out. And I always wondered what it'd be like being in a big law firm where you're not having to worry about buying supplies and copy machine toner and all that big law firm, somebody else is worrying about staples and
coffee.
computers and coffee, make your own rotten coffee in it and so forth. And so that was good work, but worked there for 98, 99. 2000, got elected. So ended up running. There's some folks that run for governor again. I said I did virtually what I wanted to do as governor. And it seemed like, these principles want to take what I learned as governor to Washington.
And real quick for the listeners, so in Virginia, we have a one-term governor. You can do more than one term, but not consecutively. So Governor Allen was governor for 94 to 98, and then you gotta sit out a cycle before you can run again.
Yeah, one term. Well, that's the other thing. In Virginia, I said we started, at a full gallop with a loose cinch. You have 4 years, and you're concentrating on doing your job. You're not worrying about running for re-election.
Right. Yeah.
And you see governors who can run for re-election, that they do something, but they don't start at a full start. Second year, they get more done. Third year, the fourth year, that all they're doing is running for re-election, talking about, I want to do A, B, C, and D. Well, if you put your mind to it, you could have accomplished that during that term. At any rate, so I'd end up running for the Senate against Chuck Robb, a former governor. Back to your original.
Yeah. It seems like in Virginia, you got to be a former governor to be a senator.
I think it helps to be a former governor in that you've been elected statewide.
Yeah.
With it. So, yeah, I mean, it's not that people can't get elected out of the blue. And, elections are determined by the quality of candidates, fundraising, and then the thing that is completely outside of your control is what are the prevailing political winds.
Yeah, right.
If prevailing political winds are with you, you can have a lot of candidates winning who aren't good quality candidates. If they're against you, you see it ends up being a national wipeout.
That's right.
And it usually happens, whoever's the incumbent party in presidential, it is the off-year election that it switches. Once in a while, it won't.
Yeah.
But at any rate, the point is that 2000 was a contentious race. It was Bush v. Gore, the lawsuit and the campaign. And I think people saw the job I did as governor and liked it. And Chuck Robb was an honorable person and obviously a very worthy, well-known figure. He'd been governor. He'd been a lieutenant governor. He's gotten elected twice, two terms, so forth. And we won that election and went to Washington. Wanted to bring our Virginia values, trusting free people and free enterprise and technology ideas to Washington. And then what happened, changed everything there was September 11th of 2001. To get hit with the terrorist attack.
Yeah.
And there's different places were affected differently. The whole country, it changed everything in our country. But having the Pentagon hit, obviously New York City and field in Pennsylvania, but with the Pentagon getting hit, and in fact, our family had just moved up there from Chesterfield. We lived in Chesterfield after I was governor.
Okay.
Outside of
suburb of Richmond.
Yeah. Midlothian is the address. And so we just moved in that Friday before, and there was a kid in the neighborhood who Nick's the name. Anyway, noticed kids are coming, bikes. Our kids were all in everything from elementary to high school. So, oh, good, kids are moving into this development we're moving into. And so lo and behold, his father was in that plane. It was actually a supporter of mine. It was in the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. And that's how we met all our neighbors. There was a vigil for that family.
Wow.
And that kid, the little kid, Nick, was friends with our friends and with our kids. And they would say, oh, Nick's not very coordinated. He's falling out. I said, you got to understand how bad this is for him.
For sure.
Affecting
How old
him.
do you think he was at the time?
Oh, he was probably about 8 years old.
Okay.
8 years old. And whenever I was playing with our kids, get Nick over here. We'll go throw dirt clods off the mound. Let's go throw, do stuff, play with them, and so forth. And then when the U.S. had the response into Afghanistan, it was a weekend. And so the whole family was gone. I'm at home. I get a call. We got to issue a statement. So I'm on the phone with my office chief of staff, Jay Timmons. All right, here's what we want to say with this. So in the midst of that, there's this doorbell, and oh, gee, who's at the door? So I go to the door in the midst of trying to compose a statement for our response to the attacks. and it's little Nick. And I said, oh, Nick, good to see you. What do you, he says, are your kids, is Forrest and Tyler, or he wanted to see Forrest.
Okay.
Is Forrest home? I said, no, they're all out somewhere. They're out and they'll come back later.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, wait a second, Nick. Nick, do you know what's happening right now? We're hitting back those people who were responsible for your father. And he looked down and kind of shuffled his feet. It's emotional now.
Oh, for sure.
And he said, yeah. And so, again, there's things that happen that seem circumstantial or providential. But the fact that he came when that was happening.
Yeah.
Ironic. Young man. And, ironic is the word for it.
Yeah.
Anyway, the 9/11 changed everything, and it affected people personally in our area, neighbors and
for sure
people who I knew worked in the Pentagon. And you learned a lot from it, and the firefighters going into that acrid smoke. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things we want to have better coordination with the emergency personnel in the Northern Virginia, D.C., Maryland area. And so a lot changed with that time. And so those were historic times, sad times, times of unity in our country for about a year.
And that's it. Well, President Bush said the day after, whatever it was, he said to his cabinet, he said, we have to remember what happened today because, and respond appropriately, because most of America will forget this in the next 6 months, or something to that effect. And very true, short memories, of what happened that day and how united we were as Americans and really the world. I was just at an event with people from Great Britain, people from Australia, people from Germany, and we were kind of discussing that, and they go, we were all Americans that day, and I know we've heard that before.
Well, it's true. They're playing our national anthem and at Notre Dame, in France, everywhere. So it was,
exactly.
The free world was united, and when people talk about NATO these days, that's the only time NATO's used that. One attack is attack on one is attack.
Article. I forget the article.
Article 5.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but there was also resolve, and it, you can hardly think of what it was like to go into airplanes. And then for Virginia, with all of that, Reagan National Airport, which my last act as governor, by the way, was to get National Airport named Reagan National Airport. That was my last.
Congratulations
as governor. But anyway, Reagan National. The Secret Service, they're paid to be paranoid, and so they shut down Reagan National because it is. I can understand why they're worried. It's plane diverts off from Reagan, you're going to hit the White House, and the plane that went down in Pennsylvania that whole day, and that's a whole nother segment of that day. But they thought that was either going to the White House or the Capitol.
Yeah, the Capitol is what
I'm saying. The Capitol's easier to hit. It's the bigger target.
Yeah.
Like the World Trade Centers.
Right.
But so they closed it, and they wanted to keep it closed. And I said, this is a taking. You got to compensate folks. And I actually worked with Jim Moran, a liberal Democrat out of there, but he agreed with me on this. We, again, hardly agree on much of anything. And I said, look, they're all, the Bush administration and Republicans are saying, you're worrying about these businesses at Reagan National Airport. Don't you care about national security? I said, yes, I do. But if you leave this to the Secret Service, they're going to keep Reagan closed forever. In fact, they wanted to keep it closed forever. I said, no, you got to manage this. You got to have proportionality to this. And if you're going to shut this down, all these vendors and concessionaires and signature air, you ought to compensate them because it's a public purpose. And so Moran would have the Democrats and me on the Republican side, and they finally reopened it with it. That lesson there, watching then years later when we had this COVID, and I was on this National COVID Recovery Commission with the Heritage Foundation, is that you need proportionality. You got to listen to different points of view. If all you listen to is doctors, they are paranoid. I mean,
lawyers
or lawyers. Lawyers Well, it depends. You get a bunch of different opinions out of lawyers. But, yeah, or you're risk adverse.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you can't do this. The speed limit.
That's what I mean, the risk adverse. That's
and I said, yeah, you can listen to the Faucis of the world and all that, but would also think about freedom and small businesses or any businesses and schooling and all the rest of it, and not have this absolutist paranoid hypochondria determining your leadership. You got to have some proportionality to things, and so I think Virginia, I guess there were states that were worse governed, but Tennessee was governed great. And same with Georgia, same with Texas, Florida.
Yeah.
Those states, sure, at the first you didn't know what was going on, but you didn't just keep everything locked down endlessly.
I was on calls with Northam. I was on one of the committees down here in Virginia Beach, and with the mayor who was Bobby Dyer, still is Bobby Dyer. So I participated in a lot of those calls.
Well, Bobby did his best to keep things open, but here we keep some of these signs that they don't use them anymore. The banning amplified music, as if amplified music was transmitting the virus. I mean, this is the idiocy of this. And I remember I had to go in a doctor's office, and I'd just wear a neckerchief. In there, and they say, "Oh, you can't wear that. You need whatever those
masks
are."
Yeah,
which to me, I can't breathe through those things. I'm claustrophobic. I can't breathe through them, and so. I said, well, I got stage 3 CS. She's like, go sit over there. Go sit over there. And so then she comes over to me with her note card or notebook. What is this that you have, this stage 3 CS? What's that? I said, stage 3 common sense. I'm following the freedom-loving protocols of Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia.
Stage 3 CS.
She was not happy at all. She was miffed by that.
But especially at that time, she was probably angry as hell.
Oh yeah.
So
well, it just made no sense. And you had people, right across the State Street in Bristol. You had Virginia that Northam Governor Northam finally opened up. You could have alcohol till 10 o'clock, as if alcohol, is not a problem then, but after 10. And so the media figured out State Street in Tennessee, that one side's Virginia, the other side's Tennessee.
Yeah.
And so they have the camera going down there, and they see these guys ambling over this, the yellow line is the state line.
Yeah.
And ambling over at 10 o'clock to keep drinking till 2 in the morning in Tennessee. And I have a lot of friends in Upper East Tennessee. And one of them emailed me. He says, with all the lockdowns in Virginia, of restaurants and bars and all this, he said, all I got to say to me is me and my friends who have shops and stores and restaurants, taverns in Tennessee really appreciate the governor of Virginia, because everyone's going to Tennessee. And then they have this spring football, and Virginia wouldn't allow, it wouldn't even allow 500 people in the state, no more than 500, for example, at JMU for a playoff game, outdoor stadium.
Right.
Absurd.
Right.
And then, but for the high school games, some of the teams, the Virginia teams, would play in Tennessee, so the parents could be at the games to watch their kids play.
Yeah.
It was just this. What bothered me most about Virginia was a timid acquiescence to all of this. This is the state of Patrick Henry.
Yeah.
Give me liberty or give me death. And these people just put up with it. And when Governor Northam finally said counties and cities can do what they want, you have these commissars in Northern Virginia and Richmond say, no, we want to stay locked down.
Right.
And I think, what is wrong with you?
Exactly. Yeah.
But the folks, again, for Northern Virginia, all they have as a comparison is Maryland, and they were as awful as we were. North Carolina was similar to Virginia. With their governor's approach to this, although they had a much better rollout of the vaccine in North Carolina. West Virginia was the best as far as vaccine rollout, because Jim Justice, a business guy, went through local pharmacies, independent pharmacies to do it, rather than the government.
Yeah, right.
And then Tennessee was wide open. So folks in Southwest Virginia saw how, we don't have to live this way.
Yeah, yeah.
And the worst thing you could do through all of that, particularly for freedom-loving folks, I remember I was with Governor Youngkin and Attorney General Jason Miyares, the health people were saying with when Biden mandated vaccines. I'm not opposed to the vaccines.
Yeah.
But I'm absolutely opposed to the government saying you
For sure.
must get it. And,
For sure.
and running people out of the military.
It's unbelievable.
Just ridiculous.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
The healthiest people around, and you want to muster them out.
Just spent millions of dollars training them in the Navy SEAL, Navy EOD Special Operations. I saw all the manpower that went into running people out. It was not just running the person out, but the guy in charge of rounding them all up and running them out. I mean, that was a whole program and a process.
Isn't that disgraceful?
Unbelievable. Yeah.
It was just so wrong. And anyway, we're down there in this health, Ballard Health, and they have hospitals in Virginia and a lot of them in Tennessee. And they said, the worst thing you can do with people around here is tell them what to do. And they said, we're having such a problem because you get federal funds because of Medicare, Medicaid, that we're having a hard time, first of all, getting enough people to work in healthcare. And if we lose these people because they don't want to get the vaccine, we're going to lose certification.
Yeah.
And so it was so right. Again, the vaccine, you can encourage people, persuade them. But from the very start, people knew that folks at risk are folks my age, older folks, so-called comorbidities.
Yeah, right.
You had diabetes, whatever.
Yeah.
Young people were not at risk.
That's right.
And it's just, to me, and hopefully people will learn from this.
Hopefully.
But I know we started in 9/11.
Yeah.
But you had all these overreactions to that. COVID overreactions to that.
Yeah.
But the beauty of the COVID situation in our country is that you can look at what different states did. And the reality is there's no appreciable difference in the mortality rates of states that were open versus the lockdown states.
Yeah.
Other than New York and New Jersey having the highest fatality rate. I think that's more of a function of the density of their population there, and they use
and kind of the proximity of the outbreak. It manifested there, I think.
Well, it's dense. Any place that's densely populated. Plus, they use the subways. I mean, holding on to those things are like whatever those hills on the.
But like the international travel that comes there as well, and yeah. So,
but the point is, all these lockdowns, all these restrictions on freedom, all this caging of people and shutting down schools, shutting down churches. Meanwhile, in Virginia, the ABC, the hard liquor stores stay open.
They went from 12 hours to 24 hours.
Yeah. We're just selling hard liquor. They can be open, but how dare you have a school or a place of worship?
Yeah, Home Depot. I mean, they were open around the clock. Walmart. I mean,
but it to me it was awful. I think poor proportionality. And it would bother me again is people accepting it. And you say, well, the governor said this. Fine. Pay attention to the evidence, the facts.
Exactly.
What you're doing here is more harmful than the disease.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned something just a few minutes ago about off-year elections in conjunction with the political winds, WINDS, right? The way the wind is blowing. So we have an off year coming up in 2 years.
Right.
And the political winds are really being generated by President Trump and his administration. And Virginia historically seems to have Democratic senators, U.S. senators, in much greater proportion than Republican U.S. senators. Is that a true statement?
What, we have more Democrats than Republican senators?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Like historically, and
well, Virginia. Understand this for Virginia. This is not surprising. The last nearly 20 years, 15 years, Virginia has turned more Democratic.
Yeah.
If you look, I like evidence. You're a business guy.
Yeah.
Bottom line, look at trends. Look at how people vote. And in most recent, really for the last 10 years plus, Virginia's votes, you should even take this last election, Virginia votes about the same as does New Jersey. Same as Minnesota, same as Maine, same as New Hampshire. In fact, in Minnesota, President Trump won by about 0.7% more in Minnesota than he did in Virginia. He lost Minnesota. Virginia. Lost New Jersey. He won that one Maine district because I like what they do with Maine, by the way, and Nebraska does it as well. But the point is that Virginia, with Northern Virginia being about 35% of the vote, and they're very liberal, you got these government college towns like Charlottesville, Blacksburg, Harrisonburg. Then you have inner cities that generally vote Democrat. It's hard for a Republican to win these days in Virginia. Governor Youngkin ran a perfect campaign. And in 2021, he had tens of millions of his own money. It was a brilliant technical campaign, great candidate, great message. His opponent, Terry McAuliffe, making the mistake of saying parents don't matter.
That's right. Yeah.
And perpetuated it for weeks.
That's right.
I didn't say, I didn't really mean to say, I meant to say that. No, he actually doubled down, tripled down on it. Plus you had political Windstar back, and the reason you could see it is the only other election is New Jersey in this off year. And everyone was surprised how close the New Jersey governor's race was that no one thought. They thought this would be a wipeout. With all of that, the political wins, great candidate, plenty of money, great message. Governor Youngkin only won by, I think, 1.9% of the vote.
Yeah, right.
There's not much margin of error to win in Virginia.
Okay, all right.
So it's tough.
Yeah.
Now, you want to see the type of candidate who could win in Virginia is Jen Kiggins. This district where we are here, the 2nd Congressional District, which is based primarily in Virginia Beach as well as the Eastern Shore, Chesapeake, Suffolk, Isle of Wight, and Franklin, and part of Southampton County. The point is, Jen Kiggins ran about 5% ahead of Trump in this same district. She's a common sense conservative. She pays attention to her district. So that's the type of candidate who can win statewide.
The U.S. Senate.
Well, if you're going to run for, But this is kind of a test. To win Virginia, you got, and this is the Youngkin approach, which is true. You really got to drive up the vote west of the Blue Ridge, the Shenandoah Valley, Southwest Virginia. Really got to get the vote way up. Then the South Side Virginia, you've got to win that big. All the rural areas, you got to, generally speaking, where there's more livestock than humans, you really get the humans out to vote. The cattle can't vote. Nor can the hogs. So you drive up the vote there, and then really do well in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach. Not just win them, but win them big, and hold down the losses in Northern Virginia.
Everything is countering those Northern Virginia losses.
It's offset that. And so, but someone like Jen Kiggins, it's the suburbs that end up being the difference. The rural areas, folks out in the country are going to vote conservative. The urban people, city people, are going to vote for the Democrats. It's the suburbs that matter. And Virginia Beach in itself is a city, it's a suburb, and it's the country. When you get to the southern half of the Pungo.
For sure.
And all of that. So she's the kind of candidate who couldn't. Maybe a Rob Whitman as well. Rob Whitman represents the first, it's rural and suburban.
Do you have any inkling? Do you have any thoughts on Jen running? Do you think she's going to run?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
No, I don't. I didn't mean to do that.
Okay. All right.
She was. Well, if she did, I'd support her.
No breaking news.
No, I don't want to break news. But hers is always the battle. She's one of the top 5 congressional districts. It's no coincidence that the night before her first election, you had Speaker McCarthy here at the rally at Valley News. And then this last one, her reelection. Here you got Speaker Johnson. Here in Virginia Beach, and the speaker could be there's races all over the country. But this is always a top 5 race, and it's a district that swings.
That's right.
Democrats and Republicans.
It's crazy how that happens.
So I want Jen to run for reelection if Jen runs. There's people who Susan and I really think the world of Jen Kiggins is one of them.
Yeah.
The other's Jason Miyares.
Yeah,
Who
absolutely.
started he worked in my 2000 campaign.
Okay.
He was my aide de camp
Okay,
in the
all right.
Senate race.
That's
And
cool.
his wife was our realtor when we moved here. He was our delegate. Obviously, now we have Ann Farrell Tata
Yeah.
as a delegate, and I knew her father-in-law,
Okay.
Coach Tata,
Okay.
and all that. So
Yeah.
I don't know who's going to run
Yeah. All right. Okay.
against Mark Warner.
Okay. Jen's been on the podcast a couple of times, actually.
Good.
So, but before her election and re-election, but again, her and I, we share Navy DNA,
Great.
and her husband, former F-18 guy, and
He's great.
yeah, and it's just when I know other pilots who trained with him a bunch of years ago, and she flew helicopters. I jumped out of helicopters.
By the way, Susan's father flew helicopters, had 2 tours of duty in Vietnam.
No kidding. Wow.
So I do admire pilots. One of the things when looking at resumes of people, I always like if they played sports. That's always good. 'Cause
Yeah.
you know teamwork and hard work and all that. I like if they were a Eagle Scout.
Oh,
Let's
for
show
sure.
that they understood you earn things.
Yeah.
That's good. Then the other's a pilot. If you're a pilot, you understand preparation. It's not just like getting a car, turn it on, and drive.
That's right.
You check, double check.
Yeah.
You're planning your routes.
Yeah.
You're not doing it on the fly, literally.
Yeah.
You're doing it. So I thought that anybody's got a pilot's license, that's a good sign of the self-discipline they have for preparation and understanding ahead of time what needs to be done, planning ahead and executing.
Wow. Yeah, totally agree. So, fascinating discussion given your history in politics. I mean, from A to Z, and obviously when you were in the Senate, people thought you were going to be a great candidate for president. And then, you didn't win that re-election, and I guess you changed course after that. But you were being talked about quite a bit.
People always like talking about someone else doing something.
Yeah. So, but it's just a super fascinating discussion, and what an education for me, what an education for the listeners. I do want to ask if there's anything that we haven't covered. Is there anything that you think is critical to this discussion that we've left out, given all the space we've covered?
Yeah, one thing I'll just say this. Because there's the sports and society that we're talking about. The thing that I learned retrospectively as far as sports and growing up in a sports family, and my father's teams were always very close. They were like family, whether it was the Bears, the Rams, Redskins, the Blitz, Wranglers in the USFL, and the teams I played on as well, is that the players were from all over the country. Different races, different religions, different ethnicities. Some were from other countries, kickers, with it. And none of that mattered. What mattered is, could they help the team win?
For sure.
Could they block? Could they punt? Could they pass? Could they, whatever it may be. It was on a level playing field. And it's an equal opportunity. No guaranteed equal results. And you learn from it that you get knocked down, you get back up. You don't brood over your mistakes. You improve from it. These are things I learned from my father, but learned from sports. And to me, that's what it's a meritocracy. And that's what we should aspire to in our country, that every single person, no matter their background, has that equal opportunity to compete and succeed on a level playing field. The government is the referees, the zebras. But you don't go to games to watch officials officiate. You want the best players, the best designs, the best execution to win. You hate it when the stinking zebras make a wrong call.
That's right.
And wreck a game. And you don't want a government saying, well, we're for this team or we're for that product. You got a free market, free enterprise, free people making decisions as to what they think is the best product or the best service. That's the free enterprise system of competition. And unfortunately, the government from time to time will favor one over the other, and you hate biased refs and you hate a biased government. And they also think, well, no one should fail. No, not everyone crosses the finish line holding hands at the same time. Some win, some lose, you improve. and learn from it.
That's right.
But that's what, unfortunately, in our country, people want to have equal results, but it's equal opportunity in a meritocracy. And so long as we aspire to that in our society, I think that solves a lot of problems. People love sports.
For sure.
And why don't we have more of our society operate that way?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I'm just going to add quick, since President Trump came in and Hegseth with DOD, et cetera, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, has been banned from all government activities, and every major corporation has dropped it, from Google to Caterpillar to Walmart. Every major corporation said, we're done with this. And, it's that E word, that equality or that equity. Diversity, I define that my own way, and it works in my organization. Yeah. Where are you from? Do you rope cattle? Can you use a tape measure? Yeah. Do you speak?
I think it's actually beneficial to have diversity of opinions and experience.
Huge, exactly.
Yeah.
Totally. And what I learned in the military is use the diversity of your team to your advantage.
Sure.
And it goes way beyond skin color, way beyond that. There's so many talents.
Well, there's different racial diversities, there's religious, there's geographic, and so forth. And I think it's beneficial, but you don't have it prescribed into quotas.
No, you can't.
Equity is a fairness thing. Well, the fairness issue, it should be equality, equality of opportunity.
Yeah, and life ain't fair. It's just the way it is.
You can say life ain't fair, but there's as far as the law is concerned, it's to be colorblind. It's going to be equal justice under the law. They have justice with blindfold,
right,
making decisions, and you don't want any bias or prejudice,
for sure,
or bigotry.
Yeah, you don't want to thumb on that scale.
Any of it. Yeah, but in sports, you have none. People don't care. They about somebody's race, their religion, their ethnicity. They care. Gee, isn't he great?
Are you going to help the team win?
Help the team win. Heck, they got a quarterback at Tennessee. You just call him Nico because his last name's so hard to pronounce. It's a
well,
so there's the same in hockey players and
same in the military. My whole 26 years in the military, you don't get to pick your code name or your call sign. Somebody else assigns it based on their observation of you. And I've had 2 or 3 different ones over the years, but that's my comparison. You use sports for a comparison, and I totally get that because of hockey. But in the military, and in my book, Elevate Your Leadership, which you'll leave here with a signed copy today.
Oh, great.
But chapter 6 is titled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It wasn't even in my original outline of the book, but I wrote it in 2020 when everything was happening, and I had to resolve that because I have 40 employees. And they're looking to me to guide them in this new thing, and I had to figure it out. So I looked at it, and I looked at the programming, and I went to the events that universities were hosting, and I was like, first of all, how do you define those 3 words? No university defined those 3 words the same way, right? They all approach it very different. But then I reflected back on my military career, and it's just like you said about sports. Nobody cared about the person next to you, what color their skin was. Can you do the job? Yeah. That's all we cared about. And I'll never forget when I was in Iraq, we're behind the wire, so to speak, but we're in a hostile area. Everybody is armed all the time. And I'm in the admin office with this young Black girl, and we struck up a conversation. I think she said she was from Baltimore, but she's got her firearm right next to her. And if we're going to go, if we're going to engage, she's my teammate, we're going to engage, and that's just all there is to it. But that was my whole career. And we didn't have those 3 words, DEI, diversity, equity. We had core values, honor, courage, and commitment.
Perfect.
And that's the way I run this business. We have core values. And if you don't understand those core values, you probably should just go work somewhere else, But so anyway, sorry, that's my take on that.
Well, it's principle-based leadership.
Yeah.
Stephen Covey had a great book on that I read before I was governor. It's principle-based leadership, and that's one of the principles.
Yeah.
And it's the DEI means everything and nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
With it. So I think if we just talk about meritocracy.
Yeah, that's it.
And equal opportunity to compete and succeed.
Yeah, I can make the D work looking at the whole of the person, and I can make the I work because inclusion, because I want to hear from everybody. Like I said earlier, my newest employee, if you got something to say, I want to hear it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's good leadership.
Yeah. So, well, Governor.
And that people feel comfortable letting you know.
For sure.
I don't, never mind. It's another story. It's another story. But I like when people correct me in a roundabout way. I was talking about Canadian versus U.S. lumber.
Yeah.
And it was at the state of the city, the same lunch we're at. And so I was talking about these tariffs being put onto Canada. And I said, they could get the metal and so forth, the aluminum. And so I was talking to a woman who at a table, I'm not going to get him into trouble.
Okay.
Because anyway, a table of folks, of friends of a business I really like a great deal. So I was saying, the Canadian lumber, we got plenty of lumber here in the United States. This woman's in development, so she would know. And this whole batch is in development. And I said, we got plenty of timber here. We actually have more national forest and wood that we really need. That's from the days before coal was being used and wood was being used for heating and everything else. And she said, well, yeah, but most of our national forests are hardwood, not softwood, which is what the Canadian lumber is. I said, well, we got plenty of private land that's in pine. Softwood is pine, which is usually the construction lumber. Using construction, you're not using oak
for sure.
Construction. It's pine, softwood. And I said, well, we got plenty of that, with private. She says, yeah, but it's not as strong as Canadian softwood. I said, really? I said, is there stronger because it takes it longer to grow, further north? And she said, I don't know, it's just stronger. I said, I should have known this. So I researched this. And yep, Canadian, because it takes longer to grow.
Okay.
The rings are closer together,
okay.
So it's tighter, so it's a more durable, stronger wood.
Wow.
And so she was right. And I said, all I've ever heard on this, all I've talked to is sawmills and lumber and timber folks in Virginia in the United States. And they'd grouse about Canadians because it's on government land. Of course, we have government national forest too. But anyway, I said, I've only listened to Virginia and U.S. forestry folks. None of them are going to tell me that Canadian softwood is better than American. I said, and so I emailed that business as, I'm so glad that she disagreed with me, because of that I learned something.
For sure.
And so you should welcome people constructively
for
and
sure.
politely, not saying but politely but firmly that she spoke up, rather than being a bobblehead. Oh yeah, whatever you say, such a But you need to welcome learning.
I call that challenging assumptions in my book. I love it when my leadership team comes in here and challenges my assumptions.
It makes your assumptions stronger.
Yep.
Or you have to modify them.
Or you got to drop it all together. I've had some initiatives that I wanted to put in play. I'm like, team, I got this great idea. Everybody in here, and they're like, they start out with, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I'm like, no, that might be a problem. And it ends in, okay, that was a pretty stupid idea. We're not doing that. But we have that trust and that relationship with each other where we can have those discussions, professional discussions, where we're not attacking each other. And I need that. As a leader, I need my team to tell me when I'm taking too big of a risk.
Yeah, my wife, Susan, would say, you needed a governor on the governor when I was governor. And generally they were right. And there were times where if I'd listened to them, I wouldn't have gotten in as much trouble.
Yeah.
Because sometimes locker room talk is great in the locker room. It doesn't translate perfectly in politics.
Yeah.
Where everyone's like a soccer player flopping. Everyone's offended. Everyone's a victim. So you got to watch your sense of humor in politics.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot more today too. So.
Yep.
Governor Allen, thank you. What a pleasure. Senator Allen, do you have a preference? Governor, Senator, George?
Well, I don't care about protocol. Supposedly you take the Haas office.
Okay.
When you're out of office, I think governor's higher.
Yeah.
But I tell people, call me Jorge. I like my name in Spanish the best.
Yeah. You ever see that thing with Schwarzenegger? He goes, you can call me Arnold. You can call me Governator. You can call me Schnitzel.
No, I haven't seen it.
A YouTube video. It's funny. He goes, call me whatever you want. Governor George Allen, thank you so much for being on the Elevate Your Leadership podcast.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Elevate Your Leadership podcast. To contact Bob directly or to learn more about how Bob can advance you and your organization through leadership training, team building, executive coaching, and public speaking, visit robertpizzini.com. Robert, Pizzini.com, and connect with him on LinkedIn.